She, beautiful college co-ed, ready to conquer the world.
She was a bright and shining star.
He was a slightly older man who promised to fulfill her every desire.
He was somewhat of a father figure and also a boyfriend.
Their bond seemed to be solid as a rock until a shocking disappearance shattered their picture-perfect romance.
She just disappeared into thin air.
Friends and family launch a desperate search to uncover the truth.
Just let me know where she is.
I wasn't gonna stop until either we found her or found out what happened to her.
The hunt turned into a real sordid chapter.
A chapter that was dripping with jealousy, intrigue, and in the end, an unspeakable evil.
I knew for a fact I was having a meeting with the devil. It sent a chill through me.
This son of a bitch was playing games with the family. He knew what had happened.
This isn't happening. This is not happening.
Wednesday, March 21st, 2007, 5:30 p.m. Investigator Sidney Miller and his partner are driving down a highway north of Houston, Texas. A pair of passengers in the back seat are giving them directions to the possible location of a missing 19-year-old woman who disappeared 6 days prior.
She had actually been missing since March the 15th of 2007.
On the passenger's instructions, the detectives exit the highway and pull into an apartment complex.
He directed us to the back of the complex, to this parking lot, where he pointed out this dumpster.
Fearing the worst, Investigator Miller and his partner peer inside, but the dumpster is empty.
Sure this is it?
There was no obvious human remains that I could see at that point.
Was this some kind of sick joke, or another dead end in an ever more troubling case?
We didn't know where she was. At that point, we didn't know what happened to her.
To unlock the mystery of this missing woman, detectives will follow a twisted path of lust and betrayal, lovers and lies, all of which leads to a young woman whose bright future was snuffed out in the darkest way imaginable. Early on, Tynesha Stewart's family knew there was something special about her.
My family just knew that Tynesha was gonna stand out and accomplish so much.
But Tynesha was no stranger to hard times. One of 6 children, Tynesha grew up in one of Houston's toughest neighborhoods and lost her father at a very young age. Still, Tynesha refused to let her environment dictate her future.
She was really good in school. She really studied her books. She took that very serious.
Blessed with natural beauty and an infectious smile, Tynesha had no problem attracting boys.
Tynesha always had multiple guys wanting to date her.
But Tynesha wanted more from love than what the average guy could offer.
Tanisha was more attracted to someone that could challenge her.
In May 2005, while working at a pizza restaurant, the stunning 17-year-old met a man that fit the bill. Handsome coworker Tim Shepard.
So what's up? We still on for this weekend?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Yeah.
You promised.
I gotta study.
Oh, you gonna act funny now?
Tim would keep asking her to go out on dates. Eventually, she just gave in and said, okay, I'll try it.
We're gonna do a little dancing. It's gonna be a good time.
Okay.
It went from them just being friends or co-workers to them actually developing an intimate relationship with each other.
Bye. That's my favorite part.
Yeah, it's gonna become my favorite show.
Although Tim was 25, neither he nor Tynesha let their 8-year age gap stand in the way of their budding romance.
Tim and Tynesha's relationship progressed pretty swiftly. It just became really serious.
I'm so happy.
Yeah, because I'm here.
Yes, because you're here.
But just as this steamy relationship reached a boiling point, Tynesha's family turned down the heat.
So a phone call is more important than me?
Hey, Mom. Yeah, it's Tim. Don't do that. Mom, don't do that. Like, come on, really?
We wanted to know what his motives were. He could have picked any other woman that was his age to date. Why is he dating such a young girl?
I don't know.
It'd be fine, look. Just do a little in-house visit. I'll smooth everything out.
Really?
Yeah. Head in the wrong place, I think.
So it's something simple.
I think you just gotta plug this plug in. Yeah.
In order to prove how much he loved Tynesha, Tim began spending time with her family. It didn't take long for Tim to win them over.
There you have it.
Yes! Thank you
Oh, no problem. You're welcome.
He was always around at my mom's house, trying to fix their TV, trying to fix their computers.
Going right for the table.
You know, I try to do what I can.
Thank you, Tim.
Oh, you're welcome.
They embraced him as another son. Her mom embraced him. Her sister, her brother embraced him as like another brother.
But just when it seemed like the young couple couldn't get any closer, some good news took Tanisha's life in a different direction.
Tanisha earned a scholarship to Texas A&M University.
I was so happy for her. It was a big accomplishment.
Even though the A&M campus is nearly 2 hours from Tanisha's home in Houston, Tanisha was determined to keep her relationship with Tim alive. But just 3 months into her first semester in college, Tim reignited a relationship with an old girlfriend and subsequently dumped Tanisha.
I remember Tanisha just bawling, crying, stating that she couldn't believe that her and Tim had broken up.
But no sooner had Tim broken up with Tanisha than he realized he'd made a terrible mistake.
He decided to go down to Texas A&M and surprise her, and from there they were able to talk and discuss whatever issues they were having, and from there they started back dating.
But this time around, something seemed different.
They just weren't seeing eye to eye, and Tanisha was on a different level. She became even more independent.
She was meeting new people and trying new things out on her own. Tanisha's goal was to move forward in life.
When Tanisha returned home for spring break, she saw Tim briefly, but spent most of her time hanging out with friends.
Who's you going to the concert with?
They're my girlfriends.
Okay. I gonna see you afterwards?
Well, we're trying to go eat afterward.
So I have to set up appointments to see my girlfriend now?
No, it's not like that.
I heard Tanisha was coming home for spring break, and I briefly talked to her. She told me that her and a couple of her friends were going to see Beyonce in concert.
But a few days before the concert, Tanisha's sister Gayla had a nightmare.
I had a bad dream that some jealous girls jumped on her and beat her, and we couldn't find her body. Tanisha was like, "Oh, calm down. I promise you that I'm gonna be okay."
Sadly, Gayla's nightmare would hit closer to home than anyone in Tanisha's family could have ever imagined. Sunday, March 18th, 2007. As Gayla returns home from church, she receives a disturbing phone call from her mother.
Hello?
Gayla?
Hey,
Have you
Mom.
talked to Tanisha?
No, not since Thursday. Why?
Oh my goodness, nobody's heard from her.
What do you mean nobody's heard from her?
She was supposed to go to the Beyonce concert, I knew that. And then she
Right.
didn't show up.
She never made it to the concert?
No.
Oh my God, Mom.
My heart had dropped because I knew and I felt it in my spirit, in my soul, that something was wrong.
Tanisha's friends echo those sentiments. 36 hours pass, and there's still no sign of Tanisha.
I'm terrified because I don't know what's going on at all. It does not make sense to me.
Why is this going on? Why is this happening?
Police would soon be asking the same questions. But nobody could anticipate the horrific answers they would uncover, or what hidden desires burned in the heart of a missing young woman. For 2 years, Tim Shepard and Tanisha Stewart had a love that knew no bounds.
When she finally decided to start dating him, she cut off, anybody else at the time.
However, when Tanisha moved away to college in the fall of 2006, her and Tim's once unbreakable bond began showing a few cracks.
It was on and off, but she still would come back and visit with Tim. And I believe Tanisha was still in love with him.
But in March 2007, their world turns upside down when Tanisha returns home for spring break and inexplicably disappears. Several days pass, and there's still no sign of Tanisha.
We went around to some hospitals. We even called the jail, just trying to cover all bases, and no one had heard from her.
Gayla Taylor also reaches out to her sister's boyfriend, Tim Shepard. But like everyone else, Tim has no clue what happened to Tanisha.
Hello?
Tim, hey, this is Gayla.
Hey, what's up?
What's going on?
Mom just called me saying that Tanisha's missing.
What? Hold on. Missing? What do you mean missing?
Yeah, she's missing. She's not answering her phone.
When is the last time you talked to her?
According to Tim, the last he spoke with Tanisha was 3 days prior, on Thursday morning.
It was like she came over to the house with me, but she left, and that was the last time I heard her or seen her.
Nobody's talked to her since then?
No, it's not like Tanisha to just leave and not answer her phone and not call anybody and not check in.
Fearing the worst, Tanisha's family files a missing persons report Monday, March 19th. Once investigators realized Tim was one of the last people to see Tanisha, they asked him to come down to the station.
So, Mr. Shepard, can you tell me the last time you talked to Tanisha?
A couple of days ago, Thursday.
His story was that he picked Tanisha up that Thursday morning around 3 o'clock in the morning.
So you was driving back to your apartment Thursday. Did y'all talk about anything?
Tried to. She got a phone call from, some guy.
The caller was Tanisha's college friend, Mark Marks, who she'd hung out with earlier that night.
This upset Timothy. When they get back to the apartment, Timothy confronts Tanisha about why is he calling you so early in the morning. And Tanisha says, I don't want to talk about it, and we can talk about it when we wake up.
I mean, we've kind of having relationship problems, so I was just trying to smooth things out and got to the apartment. She just went in the room. She didn't want to mention anything about it. So I kind of suspected she was cheating on me a little.
Tim tells investigators that despite his misgivings, he agreed to table the issue as Tanisha requested. But when they woke up a few hours later, Tim confronted Tanisha about the phone call with Mark Marks. Again, she stonewalled him.
Ty, we need to talk about this.
Talk about what?
About what? This whole situation.
What whole situation? There's nothing to talk about.
Once they get up, he confronts her about why Mr. Marks called her so early in the morning. Tanisha says, I don't want to talk about it. I'm tired of talking about it.
It's nothing to talk about?
No, it's not.
Okay, what about Mark then?
We're not talking about Mark. Like, I'm not talking
Okay,
this.
well...
Like, really? I came home to have fun. I'm not doing this.
Are you serious?
Bye.
According to Tim, Tanisha then stormed out of his apartment.
She left the apartment and left walking on her own that day. And that was the last time he says that he saw her.
Tim, are you being honest with us?
Yes, I'm being honest.
And you don't have any idea where she is?
I have no idea. I love Tanisha.
They questioned him for, I think they said 20 hours, something like that.
While Tim never wavers from his account, police are curious if his apartment might tell another story.
When Shepard gave his statement, he also gave us written consent, voluntary consent to search his apartment.
But a search of Tim's apartment fails to turn up any evidence related to Tanisha's disappearance.
We didn't have any strong suspicion that he had done anything illegal, so we gave him the key back to his apartment and we continued our investigation.
With Tim all but eliminated as a suspect, detectives set their sights on another man, Mark Marks.
He was one of the last two people to be around Tanisha. So quite naturally, Mark Marks was a person that law enforcement wanted to speak with.
Had Tanisha been seeing Mark Marks on the side? If so, could Mark be involved in Tanisha's disappearance? Hoping to answer these questions, detectives reach out to one of Tanisha's closest friends, Ashley Walton, and make a shocking discovery.
I want to thank you for coming down here, taking your time out of your busy schedule to talk with us.
Of course.
Just got a few questions to ask you.
Yeah.
Ever heard of a Mark Marks?
Of course I have. I mean, I set him and Tanisha up. He's a friend of my boyfriend. Him and Tanisha were together for maybe a month or so. They're crazy about each other.
They hit it off. But at the time, Tanisha was still dating Timothy.
Now, let me ask you this. Did Mark know about Tim?
Yes, he did. He didn't really like the fact that he had shared Tanisha with anybody. I mean, who would like that kind of idea?
Well, then why didn't she break it off with Tim?
I mean, it's hard, when you love someone, because she did love Tim.
Like I said, I appreciate you coming down here and talking with us.
The interview with Ashley is a revelation, and police can't help but wonder, could Tanisha's ongoing relationship with Tim have triggered some sort of jealous rage in boyfriend number 2, Mark Marks? Determined to unravel this mystery, detectives track Mark Marks down and bring him in for questioning on Wednesday, March 21st.
What's the nature of your relationship with Tanisha?
We're dating.
Mark was a typical 19-year-old kid. I mean, couple of tattoos, sharp, articulate. He was cooperative.
Did you know she was dating Tim Shepard as well?
Yeah, sure, she told me.
So how did that make you feel?
Well, I didn't like it.
Yeah, I bet you did.
Turning up the heat, detectives press Mark for answers.
So when was the last time you saw her?
was last Thursday.
He indicated that he had last seen her earlier Thursday. She was at some other friend's house at the time, but he had left her at the apartment.
What time was that?
I don't know, like 3 a.m.?
Did you talk about your relationship that evening?
Yeah, sure, we talked about a lot. I mean, she told me that she was ready to leave Tim, that she and I were gonna be together. She didn't want to hurt his feelings, but that she was ready to move on.
Detectives are suspicious. Mark's statement places him with Tynesha shortly before Tim picked her up. Is it possible seeing Tynesha with Tim sent Mark into a jealous rage, and that Mark waited until she left Tim's apartment a few hours later to exact his revenge?
Did you have anything to do with her disappearance?
No, not at all.
Did you pick her up from Tim's apartment?
Absolutely not.
Mark Marks is adamant he had nothing to do with Tynesha's disappearance. He also claims to have a rock-solid alibi. He was at a party with friends on nearby South Padre Island at the time Tynesha vanished.
So you have no idea what happened to her?
No, not at all. I love Tanisha. She was all I cared about. I would never do anything to hurt her.
Detectives confirm Mark's alibi and let him go.
He was as innocent as they come. It showed that it really shook him when he learned that Tynesha was missing.
With their top two suspects in the clear, detectives begin looking elsewhere. That's when a frightening theory surfaces. The possibility that Tynesha might have been abducted by a stranger after leaving Tim Shepard's apartment on foot.
We had to broaden our picture and start looking at all the other angles or possibilities that she could have come up missing.
1 week into the investigation, fear continues to mount, and with each passing day, the chances of finding Tynesha become slimmer and slimmer.
The first 24 to 48 hours are the most crucial time when someone is kidnapped or comes up missing. And after that 48-hour period, they're either dead or gone.
But as detectives dig deeper into Tynesha's case, they uncover a series of shocking yet seemingly unrelated clues. The question is, can they connect the dots before it's too late? Ever since 19-year-old Tynesha Stewart started college, her romance with boyfriend Tim Shepard had been a bit of a roller coaster ride.
They did love each other, but it was not a smooth relationship.
Tim hoped to work out the kinks in the relationship when Tynesha returned home over spring break. But shortly after arriving, Tynesha vanished without a trace.
Nothing was making sense because we couldn't find her.
Although investigators have put both Tim and Tynesha's new love interest, Mark Marks, through intense interrogations, they're still no closer to finding her. And now they're faced with a far more chilling prospect, that Tynesha may have been abducted by a stranger after leaving Tim's apartment on foot.
We were looking at the whole picture, whether somebody picked her up in a car and took her off, or somebody, grabbed inside one of the apartments.
Police combed the area surrounding the apartments where Tim lives.
He lived in the back of his apartments, and his apartment was down a dark road full of trees and woods.
While officers are searching the area for clues, back at headquarters, a tip rolls in. A woman who lives in the area recalls hearing something very suspicious around the time Tynesha disappeared.
Dispatch, do you have a K-9 unit in service? Okay, happen to meet us at 675 Cumberland. We're on the way. I just talked to a neighbor. She heard gunshots coming from the wood lines the night of Tanisha's disappearance. Said that she heard the car speed off. I got K-9 units on the way.
When the K-9 unit arrives, they immediately notice the faint smell of death in the air.
Smell that? Yeah, let's go see what we can find.
All right, let's go.
Inside my head, I just knew that somewhere around there we were gonna find her body.
Locking onto the scent, the K-9 officer leads investigators deeper into the woods. Minutes later, they finally locate the source of the smell.
What you got, bud?
The rotting remains of a dead animal.
That's not what we're looking for.
Yeah, not a bad thing, though.
All right.
While friends and family breathe a sigh of relief, the clock is ticking. Tynesha's sister Gayla decides it's time to join detectives in the search.
I started calling family, friends, getting my own search party together. They came the next day with a whole bunch of more volunteers.
We knocking on doors, talking to neighbors that may have seen or heard something, that may have seen her walking away.
Despite the additional boots on the ground, nobody recalls seeing Tynesha. But several residents make the same curious observation, that Tim Shepard spent the day after Tanisha's disappearance doing some serious barbecuing.
He had 2 grills going at one point, and they were concerned Timothy was going to burn the place down.
Worried neighbors said they dialed 911 once the smoke got out of control. After police and firemen contained the fire, they turned their attention toward Tim.
What's all the smoke here from today?
I was doing some last-minute grilling.
Tim told first responders he was cooking the main course for an upcoming church picnic.
How much meat you cooking?
It's for about 150, 200 people. Just throwing meat on the grill, I got a little bit behind, so it's just kind of got chaos.
Just kind of flamed up?
Yeah.
This is a lot of smoke.
It is, man. I had a lot of food.
The building's on fire.
Tim's story is confirmed when firemen looked around his apartment.
One of the firemen reported seeing what he thought was ribs in a bathtub that was filled with water, meat.
To detectives, it seems odd that Tim would be more interested in grilling out than helping look for his girlfriend.
If he really loved her, why is he not searching for her?
As detectives ponder that very question, they receive another bizarre report about Tim.
I myself talked to one particular individual who noticed him pouring bleach on his patio, and she said it was so strong that it was burning her eyes.
Was Tim just trying to clean up after his grill session got a bit out of hand? Or was he trying to hide something else?
That led law enforcement to look at him as a potential suspect.
When detectives shine the light of suspicion on Tim, they find something dark lurking just under the surface. But they'll also soon discover it is another man, not Tim, who holds the key to unlocking the mystery behind Tynesha Stewart's disappearance. It's been a week since 19-year-old college freshman Tynesha Stewart vanished without a trace. Although police initially ruled out her longtime boyfriend Tim Shepard as a suspect, recent reports of suspicious behavior have police circling back to him.
Tenants reported Shepard barbecuing for a period from Friday all the way over the weekend, continuously.
Perhaps more importantly, neighbors also reported seeing Tim cleaning his patio with an inordinate amount of bleach shortly after Tanisha's disappearance. Could Tim be trying to cover something up? If so, what? Hoping to learn more about Tim and Tanisha's history, detectives reach back out to her friends and family. While no one denies Tim loved Tynesha, they say that the more Tynesha spread her wings at college, the more possessive and domineering Tim became.
He felt like he pretty much owned her.
He would call, harass her, and at times even drove down to Texas A&M, walking the campus trying to find her when she wouldn't return his phone calls.
But despite Tim's increasingly controlling nature, he still held a special place in Tynesha's heart.
She just longed for Timothy to love her, without abuse, without control, without violence.
But when Tim learned about Tanisha's blossoming relationship with college friend Mark Marks, the situation went from bad to worse.
There were some threats that Timothy had made to Tanisha via, cell phone, text messages.
But the threatening messages were just the beginning.
Kayla told us about a time when Tim didn't want her to leave and that Tim had strangled her.
Threatening messages, physical violence, when coupled with the fact that Tim scoured his patio with bleach shortly after Tanisha's disappearance. Investigators are now wondering if perhaps Tim is behind Tanisha's disappearance after all.
There were some clues there. There was evidence of recent cleaning going on in that apartment. But we didn't have enough at that point to charge him with anything.
Investigators may not have enough evidence to charge Tim Shepard, but Tanisha's family is now convinced he's somehow involved.
I was like, this guy's gonna get away with this if I don't get these people to arrest him. And that's when I decided to call Quanell X.
He is somewhat of an activist for the African American community.
I've been the one that black men in this city have come to when they're wanted by police. And I've been able to, by God's grace, facilitate many peaceful surrenders.
In a face-to-face meeting with Quanell X, Tanisha's sister desperately pleads her family's case.
The reason I'm here to talk to you is my sister, Tanisha Stewart, has been missing.
Tanisha Stewart? And when was the last time you seen her?
They were adamant that they knew something had happened to her, and they were extremely terrified and worried of where was their loved one.
Her boyfriend, Tim, is the last one to see her.
Tim Shepard?
Yes, that's him.
Turns out Quanell is already familiar with Tanisha's disappearance. Tim Shepard's family had also called on him to help.
And they were asking me to get involved to help protect him from overzealous cops that were going to pin a dirty charge on him. His family saying he didn't do anything.
Unsure who to believe, Quanell X calls Tim Shepard, who agrees to a private meeting at his apartment.
Tim?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Quanell.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Hey, brother. How you doing?
I'm freaking out, man.
When Quanell arrives, Tim is upset.
I'm saying, brother, it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right, Tim. And he was extremely stressed.
Is there any place we can talk?
Just talking in the bathroom. I feel like they have my place wired or something.
Okay, let's go to that.
Okay.
He said he's trying to set me up. And I said, Tim, if you're innocent, I'll fight for you, brother. But if you're not innocent, brother, we need to talk about this.
Tim nervously recalls the last time he saw Tanisha.
We had a fight and she stormed out. That was the last time I saw her. I swear.
I said, brother, look me in my eye. And he put his head down like that. And then I knew there was more to the story than what he was saying. I said, Tim, look me in my eye. Tim, did you do something to this girl? And at that moment, everything changed. Everything.
In the case of missing college freshman Tanisha Stewart, some peculiar behavior, along with a series of eyewitness statements, have catapulted Tanisha's boyfriend, Tim Shepard, to the top of the suspect list. But without any physical evidence connecting Tim to any crime, bringing charges against him will be impossible. In desperation, Tanisha's family has turned to a well-known community activist named Quanell X for help. And in an emotional face-to-face meeting with Tim, Quanell seems to be on the verge of a breakthrough.
He said to me, they can give me the death penalty. And I said, Tim, why would they give you the death penalty, man?
Is she dead?
Yeah.
Tim tells Quanell that when Tanisha refused to elaborate on her relationship with Mark Marks, he flew into a jealous rage.
She was messing with this guy named Mark and...
Did y'all get into a fight?
Yeah.
And what happened?
I just went into a rage and I killed her.
Tim tells Quanell that as Tanisha was walking out the door, he attacked her and ultimately strangled her to death.
And what'd you do with her after that?
Put her body in a dumpster.
My heart was racing. Because now I've gone from trying to help this brother, possibly who's being set up by overzealous investigators, to a man who has now committed a cold-blooded killing.
After hearing Tim's confession, Quanell X relays the statement to investigator Sidney Miller. The two men, along with Miller's partner and a distraught Tim Shepard, then head to a dumpster where Tim allegedly disposed of Tanisha's body.
We're going to be able to give this family some closure and find out what actually happened.
Believing Tanisha's body is inside the trash bin, investigator Miller calls in a CSI team. But no sooner have they started putting up the yellow tape than Tanisha's family pulls up.
He just kept saying, is she alive? Is she alive? And I said, no. I said, she's not alive. And they all just broke down in hysterics.
I mean, it's like my heart was ripped out of my chest.
But while Tanisha's family mourns their apparent loss, CSIs make a shocking discovery. Tanisha's body isn't in the dumpster, nor for that matter is anything else.
I noticed that the dumpster, it looked like it had been recently emptied.
So now where did the dumpster go? Well, there's a landfill. It's massive.
Detectives know that in a city the size of Houston, the chances of finding Tanisha's body in a landfill are slim to none.
You have not a needle in a haystack, but you've got a needle in a stack of haystacks.
After learning that a search of the landfill would cost upwards of $500,000, a tough decision is made.
Tanisha's family talked to the sheriff and said, don't waste the money.
Making matters even more difficult is the fact that shortly after his arrest, Tim Shepard has a change of heart about his confession.
He had invoked his right to have an attorney, and at that point he didn't want to talk. But based on the information we already had, at that point, we had enough to charge him.
But with Tim's prior confession without Tanisha's body, it will be difficult to make the murder charges stick. Investigators must find more evidence in order to solidify their case. Again, they turn to the CSI team to scour Tim's apartment for additional clues.
We knew that we would be looking for microscopic evidence, so we just made sure we wouldn't leave a stone unturned.
The search pays off.
We found some bone fragments in the garbage disposal, eventually found what we later learned was enamel.
Officer Hunter, found this next to the grill.
Did you get a photograph of it?
I did.
Let's back up.
CSIs also find some charred bone fragments not far from where Tim kept his grill. The bone fragments are sent to the crime lab. While the charred remains are in too poor a condition to be positively ID'd, the enamel found in the disposal is determined to be from one of Tanisha's teeth.
I think your teeth don't go down a garbage disposal unless someone puts them down there.
Between this new evidence, the accounts of Tim's nonstop barbecuing, and reports from a fireman who saw what he thought was uncooked meat floating in Tim's bathtub, a new, more horrific picture of the crime begins to emerge.
They believe that Tanisha, she had been chopped up and incinerated.
Armed with this gruesome information, a grand jury officially indicts Tim Shepard for the murder of Tanisha Stewart. But as the case heads to trial, prosecutors know they still face an uphill battle.
That was probably the biggest hurdle, to get the jury to convict just based on the circumstantial evidence alone.
On September 29, 2008, the state of Texas versus Tim Shepard gets underway.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Tim Shepard is responsible for the death of Tanisha Stewart.
I felt a lot of pressure just because I didn't want to let Tanisha's family down, and I didn't want to let Tanisha down.
Prosecutors open by laying out the state's version of the crime. In the morning hours of March 15, 2007, Tim Shepard murdered Tanisha in his Houston apartment. To cover up the crime, Tim hacked Tanisha's body into pieces, then spent days cooking her remains over a grill before tossing them in the dumpster to cover his tracks.
There was sufficient evidence for us to put it before a jury and let them make the determination that she was in fact killed and mutilated in a gruesome manner.
As for a motive, prosecutors claim Tim would have rather seen Tanisha dead than to see her with another man.
She disrespected him because she began to move on with her life.
Tim's defense team counters that the state's theory is just that, a theory.
Regardless of what the prosecution tells you, there is no evidence.
In this case, there is no body. We felt like without a body, this would be a hurdle for the prosecution.
Even so, there was no denying the tooth fragments found inside Tim's disposal did come from Tanisha.
No person that was alive is going to quietly allow someone to extract a tooth or teeth from them and put them in a garbage disposal.
After putting forth physical evidence, prosecutors called their star witness to the stand, Quanell X.
Quanell testified where Timothy identified locations where he tossed her body after he mutilated her, and that was gripping testimony.
I asked him if he killed her, and he said yes.
Quanell's testimony is riveting, but some in the courtroom question his credibility.
He's a controversial character. He has done time for selling drugs. He has now made a name for himself for standing up for minority rights in the city.
With Quanell X's turn on the witness stand seemingly a push, prosecutors play their last card and call the defendant's own cousin, Nicholas Shepard, to the stand. What Nicholas has to say blows everyone in the courtroom away.
Nicholas testified to the fact that Timothy said he would do harm to Tanisha if it came down to it, and that if he had to kill somebody, he would cut them up and boil them.
I think the jury was a little bit surprised about what they were hearing. You could sense some shock and disbelief.
But before the final gavel falls, The defense will call a surprise witness to the stand. A witness whose story could crush the prosecution's case. A witness named Tim. Prosecutors claim that 29-year-old Tim Shepard killed his beautiful young girlfriend, Tynesha Stewart, in order to prevent her from seeing another man. Then Tim gruesomely dismembered, burned, and disposed of Tynesha's remains. Tim's attorneys counter that since police never recovered Tynesha's body, there's no proof a murder was ever committed.
How do we know she's even dead?
But Tim's own cousin, Nicholas Shepard, testifies that Tim confessed he would do just that if Tynesha ever tried to leave him.
He said if she ever left from me, he would cut her up, boil her.
The testimony of Nicholas Shepard seems to seal the deal. After 24 hours of deliberation, the jury returns with their verdict.
The jury came back with a guilty verdict of murder, and I was happy for Tynesha's mother and her family and her friends.
I was relieved because I felt like that was finally the end of the emotional roller coaster that we had all experienced within the past year.
But even with the guilty verdict, this roller coaster trial is far from over. In Texas, the official verdict can't be handed down until after the sentencing hearing, and can even be overturned during that phase of the process. And at his sentencing hearing, Tim Shepard makes a bold move and takes the stand in his own defense. Under oath, Tim claims that on the night of the crime, Tynesha was the one who was hungry for blood, and that Tim had killed her purely in self-defense.
Tim tried to make her look like she was a participant in her own death. If she wouldn't have did what she did, then maybe he wouldn't have did what he did.
Tim tells the jury that it started when he confronted Tynesha about her relationship with Mark Marks.
For a long time, I've been suspected she's been cheating on me. I asked her about this guy named Mark.
Sit down, let's just talk about it.
There's nothing to talk
It's
about.
a lot to talk about. What about this? Who's this Mark guy? Who is Mark?
No, Mark doesn't matter. Move.
He said that he was blocking the door so that she wouldn't leave because he wanted to work things out.
According to Tim, that's when Tynesha snapped.
She just flipped out.
He says that Tynesha grabbed some knife that was laying on a coffee table and slashed at him.
What are you doing?
Move.
Put it down.
And he grabbed her neck to keep her from stabbing or slashing at him anymore.
He said there was a brief struggle and that he blacked out. And that's all he remembers until he woke up and she wasn't breathing.
To support Tim's testimony, his attorneys submit photographs taken of Tim's hands the night he was arrested. Photographs that suggest Tim had recently been cut by some sort of sharp object.
Tim really believed that he was defending himself and that it was an accident.
It's compelling evidence. And if the jury believes Tim's version of events, it's possible that he will spend little to no time in prison.
It just felt like a nightmare. I just couldn't believe that this was unspiraling the way that it was.
But the scales of justice tipped back in prosecutors' favor when they asked him to explain his ghastly behavior in the wake of Tynesha's death.
We talked about what he did with the parts of her body, and I asked if he put them on the barbecue pit, and he very quickly corrected me and said, no, I put her in the smoker.
To me, that's not human.
On the heels of this gruesome testimony, not only does the jury uphold the guilty verdict, but they hammer Tim with the maximum sentence possible.
Assess his punishment at confinement in the Institutional Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 99 years.
They knew that a man that was capable of such a cold-blooded murder and could talk about it in such a way was dangerous and could never be trusted.
But in the minds of Tynesha's friends and family, the punishment doesn't go far enough.
I prefer...
The rain doesn't just fall in the town of Oak Haven. It suffocates it, washing away secrets that were never meant to be found. It was October 14th, 1992, a night when the silence was shattered by a scream that vanished as quickly as it had erupted. Sarah Miller, a 19-year-old with dreams wider than the horizon, stepped out of her front door to collect the mail and simply ceased to exist. No struggle, no witnesses, only a single leather glove left on the damp pavement, a silent sentinel in the dark. For 34 years, This cold case has been a festering wound in the heart of a community that prefers to look away. The police logs from that era are a testament to incompetence and desperation, filled with blurred Polaroid photos of muddy tracks and witness statements that contradict each other with every passing hour. The lead detective, a man who aged 20 years in the span of one, spent his remaining days staring at a wall covered in red string, tracing connections that led to dead ends and ghosts. Families were torn apart by suspicion. Fathers looked at sons with newfound dread, and neighbors stopped acknowledging each other in the grocery store aisles. It was a perfect crime, a vacuum of information that swallowed reality whole. Then the miracle happened, or perhaps the curse returned. A local construction crew, tearing up the foundation of an abandoned textile mill on the edge of town, struck something hard. Not metal, not stone, but a locked, rusted lockbox buried 3 feet deep in the silt. Inside, sealed in heavy plastic that defied the rot of 3 decades, was a cache of Polaroid photographs and a blood-stained diary that shouldn't have existed. The news of this discovery didn't just ripple through the town. It acted as a thunderclap that woke the sleeping giants of the justice system. The cold case label was ripped off the file, replaced by a frantic, high-stakes investigation that left no stone unturned. Forensic teams swarmed the site like ants, their bright floodlights piercing the veil of the fog, casting long, distorted shadows against the skeletal remains of the mill. Every resident who had been in Oak Haven in 1992 was suddenly a person of interest, and the air grew thick with the metallic tang of fear. The arrest came on a Tuesday morning, a moment so precise and jarring that it felt scripted by a malevolent god. As the handcuffs clicked shut on the wrists of Arthur Vance, a pillar of the community, the town collectively stopped breathing. He was the man who had coached the Little League, the man who had organized the annual Harvest Festival, the man who had comforted Sarah's mother at the funeral. The betrayal felt physical, a sickness rising in the throat of every soul in Oak Haven. His house, a sprawling Victorian structure that stood on the hill like a watchful predator, was swarmed by SWAT teams. They didn't just find evidence, they found a shrine. The walls of his basement were plastered with clippings from that very day in 1992, meticulously annotated in a handwriting that screamed of madness. The community, once united by shared, grieving mystery, now found itself splintered by the sheer brutality of the truth. How could he have walked among them? How could he have shared a coffee with the sheriff while keeping a trophy of a murder in his cellar? The psychological weight of this realization is crushing, a heavy blanket that refuses to lift. It wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was a realization that the monster you fear isn't in the shadows, but at the dinner table. Families are currently grappling with the aftermath, the stunned silence of the Miller family echoing in every courtroom hearing. The evidence is mountainous. DNA samples matched with microscopic accuracy, digital records from old hard drives unearthed in the attic, and the damning, written confession found in that rusted box. It is a textbook case of a sociopath hidden in plain sight, a predator who fed on the normalcy of a small town to mask his hunger. As the trial looms, the town of Oak Haven is no longer just a place on a map. It is a crime scene, a living, breathing testament to the fact that time does not heal all wounds, it only buries them, waiting for the right moment to dig them back up into the light of day. The cold case is solved, the handcuffs are on, but the horror remains, etched into the architecture of the town and the nightmares of those who thought they knew the truth. The arrest of Arthur Vance was not merely the conclusion of a singular investigation, it was the violent tearing open of a social fabric that had been tightly woven for 34 years. As the news vans descended upon Oak Haven, the town became a theater of the macabre, with every resident thrust into the role of both witness and casualty. Inside the walls of the local precinct, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the palpable, vibrating tension of officers who were realizing, with every passing hour, that the monster they had caught had been hiding in the most mundane of places. Detective Elias Thorne, the man who had inherited this cold case from his predecessor, sat in the observation room, his knuckles white as he stared through the one-way glass at Vance. The suspect sat with his hands cuffed to the table, his posture unnervingly composed, his eyes fixed on the blank, sterile wall. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a grandfather, a neighbor, a man who had paid his taxes on time for 3 decades. But the evidence now sitting in the evidence locker, the bloodstained diary, the Polaroids of Sarah Miller taken moments before her disappearance, and the collection of personal trinkets stolen from the victims, told a far more gruesome story. The investigation moved from the discovery at the textile mill to a systematic deconstruction of Vance's entire life. Every floorboard of his Victorian home was pried up, every crawlspace inspected with infrared cameras, every floor-to-ceiling bookshelf dismantled to see what secrets lay behind the facade of respectability. It was a forensic excavation of a human soul. As the investigators delved deeper, they found that the 1992 murder was not an isolated incident. It was, in fact, the inaugural act of a long-running performance of cruelty. Beneath the floorboards of the master bedroom, they found a hidden compartment containing a map of the county, marked with red pins that corresponded to unsolved disappearances and unexplained runaways, spanning from 1992 to 2015. The realization hit the investigative team like a physical blow. They hadn't just solved a cold case. They had stumbled into the lair of a serial predator who had used the quiet, trusting nature of Oakhaven as his own private hunting ground. The community's sense of safety, already fractured by the initial arrest, completely disintegrated. Parents began keeping their children indoors, locking doors that had remained open for generations. The trust that once bound the neighbors together was replaced by an agonizing paranoia. If Arthur Vance could be the neighborhood hero while harboring such darkness, who else was hiding in plain sight? The detectives conducted interviews that lasted deep into the night, their voices growing hoarse as they questioned people who had been Vance's closest allies. They spoke to the woman who had lived next door for 20 years, who described him as a gentleman who always brought in the mail. They spoke to the local pastor, who shook with rage as he recounted how Vance had sat in the front pew every Sunday, leading the congregation in hymns, his voice clear and resonant, untouched by the weight of the sins he committed under the cover of darkness. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming for the entire town. It was a collective trauma, a shared realization that their reality was a stage play, and they had been cast as extras in a horror film they didn't know they were starring in. Meanwhile, inside the interrogation room, the silence was a weapon. Detective Thorne refused to engage in the typical back and forth. He simply placed the photos on the table one by one. The sight of Sarah Miller, captured in the final, terrifying moments of her innocence, would have broken any ordinary man. But Vance didn't flinch. He traced the edge of a photograph with a trembling finger, a faint, ghost-like smile dancing on his lips. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin, like parchment paper, rasping with the rust of years of disuse. He spoke of the collection as if it were a catalog of artistic achievements. He didn't use the word murder. He used words like preservation, stasis, and permanence. He described the night of October 14, 1992, with a level of detail that made the recording detectives physically ill. He talked about the rain, the smell of damp earth, and the specific way Sarah had looked at him, not with recognition, but with a terrifying, absolute realization that her life was over. He described the moment of his arrest by the construction crew as a form of relief, a release from the exhausting labor of maintaining his double life. The psychological warfare being waged inside the precinct was mirrored in the streets. The media frenzy was absolute. Satellite trucks choked the narrow roads, and reporters stood in the rain, shouting into cameras about the Oakhaven butcher. It was a spectacle that fed on the town's pain, transforming a private tragedy into a national headline. The Miller family, who had spent decades waiting for an answer, now found themselves paralyzed by the answers they received. They had wanted justice, but the truth was a jagged, poisonous thing. Sarah's mother, once a woman of quiet hope, now sat in her darkened living room, surrounded by the objects Sarah had left behind: a hairbrush, a school yearbook, a pair of worn-out sneakers, trying to reconcile the daughter she remembered with the victim whose final moments were now the subject of public consumption. The investigation had moved from a cold case into a high-octane legal marathon, with the prosecutor preparing a case that would rely on the forensic mountain of evidence they had unearthed from the mill and the house. The DNA evidence was the final nail in the coffin, a scientific certainty that shattered any lingering defense strategy. Scientists from the state lab had worked round the clock, processing the samples recovered from the diary pages and the plastic casings. The match was definitive. It was not just a probability, it was a biological fingerprint. With the DNA confirmation, the narrative shifted from alleged to indisputable. The community, however, remained in a state of suspended shock. The church held vigils, but they were not for the living. They were for the loss of innocence. The town of Oakhaven began to look different to those who lived there. The woods behind the mill, once a place for hiking and childhood exploration, were now avoided like a burial ground. The Victorian house on the hill, once a symbol of success, was now a rotting monument to betrayal, its windows like empty eyes watching the town. The detective's perspective shifted as well. Thorne found himself obsessed with the why. He went over the files again and again, trying to find the point where Arthur Vance had diverged from the path of a normal human being. Was there a moment of trauma? A genetic trigger? Or was he simply born with a hollow space where empathy should have resided? The investigation suggested the latter. Vance had a history of manipulation that dated back to his childhood, subtle patterns of cruelty that had been ignored or dismissed as eccentricities. It was a lesson in how society overlooks the warning signs of a predator because they don't fit the archetype of a monster. He didn't wear a mask. He wore a mask of kindness, which, in retrospect, was the most effective camouflage possible. As the files grew thicker, so did the weight of the investigation. Every day brought a new revelation, a hidden bank account, a series of burner phones, a digital trail that revealed he had been scouting potential victims for years, his predatory gaze never truly resting. The court proceedings began with a surreal formality. The judge, the bailiffs, the defense attorneys, they were all moving through the motions of justice, but the gravity of the case made every gesture feel heavy and significant. When Vance entered the courtroom, the air seemed to leave the room. He walked with a slight limp, his head bowed, his hands shackled. He looked smaller, diminished by the fluorescent lights, but the malice still radiated from him, a cold current that hit everyone in the front rows. The gallery was packed with the families of other victims, people who had spent decades wondering where their loved ones had gone, only to realize that the answer had been hiding in their own backyard. The emotional atmosphere was volcanic. There were muffled sobs, sharp intakes of breath, and the heavy, metallic sound of the court reporter's machine clicking away, documenting the horror for posterity. As the testimony began, the reality of the 1992 case became the focal point of the nation's attention. The lead detective took the stand, recounting the moment the rusted box was pulled from the silt. He described the smell of the mud, the weight of the box, and the terrifying, cold realization that they had finally found her. He explained how the evidence was processed, the way the forensic team had painstakingly reconstructed the events of that night. He was a professional, but his voice cracked when he described the contents of the diary, the way Vance had written about Sarah not as a person, but as a trophy, a moment captured in time. The defense team, clearly outmatched by the sheer volume of evidence, could do little more than attempt to question the chain of custody. It was a hollow effort, a desperate scramble to find a crack in a wall that had already crumbled. The prosecution was relentless, building a case that was airtight, a narrative of premeditation and calculated cruelty that left no room for doubt. The trial lasted for weeks, a grueling, exhausting experience for everyone involved. For the Miller family, it was a slow-motion car crash, a process of reliving their worst nightmare in vivid, agonizing detail. They saw the photos, they heard the descriptions of the final moments, they faced the man who had stolen their future. Yet, throughout it all, there was a strange, haunting quality to the proceedings, a sense that, even now, the truth was deeper than they could grasp. As the trial drew to a close, the sense of dread only intensified. The evidence was clear, the case was solid, but the haunting, lingering question remained. What else was out there? What other secrets had Vance buried? What other lives had he touched and discarded without anyone ever knowing? The investigation had ended the cold case, but it had started a new, even more terrifying process of self-reflection for the entire town. The final days of the trial were defined by the testimony of the forensic psychologist, a woman who had spent months interviewing Vance in his cell. She described him as a man with no tether to humanity, a person whose cognitive processes were entirely self-contained. He didn't care about the trial, she testified. He didn't care about the consequences. He was only concerned with the way his story was being told. He wanted to be remembered as the man who created the Oakhaven mystery. It was a chilling revelation, one that solidified his status as a psychopath of the highest order. The jury, faced with this overwhelming evidence of depravity, took only 4 hours to reach a verdict. When the word guilty was read, there was no cheering. There was only a profound, hollow silence. The case was over, but the town of Oakhaven would never be the same. The cold case, which had once been a mystery to be solved, was now a permanent scar, a reminder that the darkness is not just in the movies. It is in the house next door. It is in the smile of a neighbor, and it is in the very soil we walk upon. As the court adjourned and the bailiffs led Vance out of the courtroom, he paused for a brief second, looking back at the gallery. For the first time, he met the eyes of Sarah Miller's father. There was no apology in his look, no regret, no hint of a conscience. There was only a cold, empty recognition, the look of a predator who knew he had left his mark on the world forever. As the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind him, the sound echoed through the hallway, a sharp, final note in a symphony of horror that had lasted for over 3 decades. The case was closed, but the shadow of Arthur Vance would hang over Oakhaven for generations to come, a testament to the chilling, terrifying truth that the most dangerous secrets are the ones that never whisper, but wait in the silence of a cold case. The aftermath of the trial left Oakhaven in a state of mourning. The physical evidence was sent to the state archive, the police files were sealed, and the textile mill was leveled to the ground, its history turned into debris. But the emotional wreckage was immense. The families of the victims began to reach out to one another, forming support groups to cope with the trauma that had been forcibly resurfaced. They met in the high school gymnasium, the space where they had once celebrated graduations and homecoming games, now repurposed as a place to share their grief. They spoke of the dreams they had lost, the milestones they would never see, and the crushing weight of the what-ifs. The investigation had provided answers, but those answers were not a cure. They were merely the starting point for a life of managing a trauma that had been ignored for 34 years. The detective, Thorne, returned to his office, but he couldn't let go of the case. He found himself returning to the file, looking at the photos, and wondering about the gaps. There were still unexplained threads, a few inconsistencies in Vance's timeline, a handful of names in his diary that were never identified. He knew that the case was closed in the eyes of the law, but he felt the pull of the remaining secrets. The mystery was a spiderweb, and he had only pulled down the main strand. He spent his nights, his days off, and his quiet hours at home re-examining the evidence, looking for patterns that had been missed in the rush to secure a conviction. It was an obsession that defined his life, a testament to the idea that a cold case is never truly solved until every piece of the puzzle is in its rightful place. He became a sentinel of the truth, a man who refused to let the darkness win, even when the rest of the world had moved on. The town, meanwhile, started to move toward a new form of existence. New businesses opened where the old ones had failed, new families moved into the houses that had once been vacant, and the scars of the past began to fade into the landscape. But the name of Sarah Miller and the shadow of Arthur Vance remained a part of the local lore. The case was the definitive narrative of the town, a story that would be told for years to come, a cautionary tale of what happens when a community ignores the monsters in its midst. It was a lesson in vigilance, a lesson in the fragility of truth, and a lesson in the power of the past to reach out and reclaim the present. The final piece of evidence, a small, silver locket found in the pocket of Vance's coat, was returned to the Miller family. They didn't know whose it was. It didn't belong to Sarah. It was another victim, another secret, another life stolen and forgotten. They held the locket as a symbol of the work that remained, a physical manifestation of the unresolved horror that still permeated the town. As they looked at the locket, they realized that while the court had provided a verdict, they would never find true closure. The cold case was over, but the journey toward understanding and healing was only just beginning. This story of Oak Haven stands as a stark, chilling reminder of the complexity of the human experience. It is a story of a community that was forced to confront its darkest potential, a story of individuals who had to find the strength to face the truth, and a story of a detective who refused to let the light go out. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of incomprehensible horror, and a reminder that even when the truth is hidden for decades, it will eventually find a way back into the light. As the sun sets over Oak Haven, casting long shadows across the valley, the town feels a little different. The silence that once felt like a secret now feels like a weight. The wind that blows through the trees carries the whispers of the past, a constant, low-frequency hum that reminds everyone who lives there of the cost of their innocence. The case is a part of their identity now, an inseparable thread in the tapestry of their lives. And as they go about their daily routines, they look a little more closely at their neighbors, they lock their doors a little more tightly, and they remember. They remember the rain, the scream, the glove, and the man who taught them that the most dangerous monsters are the ones we invite into our homes. The cold case is closed, but the shadow remains, a permanent resident of the town, a silent witness to the truth that lies buried beneath the surface of the mundane. The story of the 1992 murder is not just a tale of a serial killer. It is a study of a town, a study of fear, and a study of the way we choose to perceive the world around us. It is a reflection of the darkness that exists in the heart of humanity and the light that we must constantly strive to shine upon it, no matter how much we may want to turn away. The investigation may have ended, but the story will always be there, a haunting, indelible part of the landscape, a permanent reminder of the fragility of our peace and the necessity of our awareness. And so, the legend of Oak Haven continues, a dark, pulsing heart of mystery that reminds us all that the truth is rarely simple, and justice, when it finally comes, is often a bittersweet, hollow victory. In the end, all that remains is the record. The files, the photographs, the transcripts, the evidence, a mountain of paper and digital memory that documents the life and crimes of Arthur Vance. It is a legacy of destruction, a monument to the damage that one human being can inflict upon a community. It is a story that will be read, studied, and debated for years, a case that will serve as a teaching tool for investigators and a cautionary tale for society. It is the end of the mystery, but it is not the end of the impact. The shadow of the 1992 case will linger for a long, long time, an indelible mark on the soul of Oak Haven, a silent, persistent echo of a truth that was, for far too long, nothing more than a cold case. The final act of the story belongs not to the detectives, or the prosecutors, or the press, but to the people of Oak Haven. They are the ones who have to live with the reality of what happened, the ones who have to carry the weight of the past into the future. They are the ones who have to find a way to rebuild their lives in the shadow of the truth, to find hope in the face of despair, and to move forward without forgetting. It is a difficult, painful, and necessary process, one that will define them for generations. And as they do, they will carry with them the memory of the cold case, a reminder of the darkness that was once in their midst, and a symbol of the courage it takes to face the truth, no matter how much it hurts. The story ends here, but the legacy of the 1992 investigation continues. It is a story that is not just about a crime, but about the nature of humanity, the strength of a community, and the power of the truth to change everything. It is a tale that will be remembered long after the last of the files has been archived, as a chilling reminder of the complexity of the world we live in and the necessity of our constant vigilance in the face of the unknown. The cold case is finally over. The shadows have been pushed back, and the town of Oak Haven stands, forever changed, forever scarred, but finally, at long last, looking the truth directly in the eye. As the years pass, The details of the crime will begin to blur, the names will fade, and the specifics of the investigation will be relegated to the dusty corners of history books and true crime podcasts. But the essence of the story, the feeling of the town, and the memory of the tragedy will endure. It will become a part of the local mythology, a ghost story that parents tell their children, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the importance of awareness. It is a story that will live on, as all stories do, a testament to the enduring power of the truth, even when it is buried deep, even when it is hidden for decades, and even when it is finally, inevitably, forced back into the light. The cold case is closed, but the story of Oakhaven is never truly over. It is a living, breathing history, a testament to the way we all try to make sense of the world, even when the truths we find are the ones we would rather not know. And in that, there is a certain chilling and beautiful kind of clarity. The case is finished, the curtain is fallen, and the truth, at last, is free. The forensic architecture of the Arthur Vance case began to reveal architectural secrets that turned the entire town of Oakhaven into an open-air crime scene. As investigators systematically dismantled the Victorian estate, they discovered that the basement was not merely a storage area, but a highly calculated, soundproofed chamber designed for long-term detention. The walls, paneled in heavy oak and lined with industrial-grade acoustic foam, had been meticulously engineered to absorb sound, ensuring that even if a victim screamed, the sound would never reach the floorboards above. This discovery, made 3 weeks after the initial arrest, sent a fresh wave of nausea through the community. The sheer methodical nature of Vance's preparation, the fact that he had been anticipating these crimes long before he committed the first one in 1992, suggested a psyche that was not just deranged, but predatory in its purest, most mechanical form. Inside the hidden compartments of the basement, the police found an inventory of remembrance items that functioned like a museum of misery. Each shelf was labeled with a date and a brief, cryptic descriptor, documenting not just the 1992 case, but a series of other disappearances that had been dismissed as accidents or runaways over the subsequent decades. There were school photos, driver's licenses, pieces of jewelry, and personal letters, all preserved in airtight vacuum-sealed bags. The investigators, many of whom were veterans of the Homicide Division, found themselves needing breaks every hour. The sheer volume of suffering compressed into such a small space was too much for the human mind to process. Lead Detective Thorne described the atmosphere in the basement as heavy with the weight of stolen potential, a sentiment that echoed through the police department as they began the gargantuan task of cataloging every piece of evidence. As the forensic analysis of the Oakhaven Butcher case proceeded, the scope of the investigation expanded into the digital realm. The discovery of a hidden server in the attic, disguised as a common climate control unit, provided a window into Vance's digital life. He had been a pioneer in the early days of the internet, using anonymous message boards to scout potential targets and to brag, in coded language, about his exploits. He wasn't just a killer, he was a collector of digital attention. He had archived his own crimes in a personal database, complete with time-stamped entries and notes on how he had evaded suspicion. The level of detail was staggering. He had documented his encounters with local law enforcement, noting which officers were vigilant and which ones were easily misled. This document became the prosecution's most powerful weapon, a roadmap of his arrogance and his belief that he was superior to the system he had navigated for so long. The community's reaction to these revelations was a mixture of absolute horror and a desperate need for scapegoats. Citizens gathered outside the town hall, demanding to know how Vance had operated for so long without a single red flag being raised. The local government was forced to launch an internal inquiry, scrutinizing the performance of the police force from the early 90s onward. It turned out that there had been missed opportunities, anonymous tips that were never logged, suspicious sightings that were dismissed, and connections between cases that were never made. The failure wasn't just Vance's monstrous behavior. It was the institutional blindness of a town that wanted to believe in its own perfection. This institutional guilt added a layer of complexity to the legal proceedings as the victims' families began to contemplate civil litigation against the city itself, arguing that the protection they were owed had been stripped away by incompetence. As the trial entered its discovery phase, the courtroom became a theater of excruciating detail. The prosecution presented the diary found at the textile mill, which was now known as the Chronicle of Shadows. Reading excerpts aloud in court was a harrowing experience. The prose was cold, detached, and chillingly devoid of empathy. Vance described the act of murder as if he were discussing a landscape painting or a scientific experiment. He detailed his motivations, which were rooted in a profound disdain for the innocence of others. He viewed his victims as obstacles to his own intellectual superiority, objects that needed to be curated to ensure they wouldn't continue to live lives of meaningless normalcy. Hearing these words spoken aloud, the families in the gallery were forced to confront the reality that their loved ones had been dehumanized by someone they had once considered a neighbor. Meanwhile, the psychological profiling of Arthur Vance took a turn that left the experts bewildered. The court-appointed psychiatrist, Dr. Eris Thorne, noted that Vance demonstrated no signs of traditional psychosis. He was perfectly lucid, perfectly aware of the morality of his actions, and fully cognizant of the legal consequences. He was, in the clinical sense, a high-functioning malignant narcissist. He had lived a life of controlled impulse, restraining his urges to ensure he remained a permanent fixture in the town's social hierarchy. The realization that he had consciously chosen to commit these acts, rather than being driven by some uncontrollable psychological break, made him all the more terrifying to the public. He was not a beast in the traditional sense. He was a man who had decided, with terrifying clarity, to destroy lives for his own gratification. As the prosecution built its case, the defense team, led by a high-profile attorney from the city, attempted to argue for a plea of insanity, claiming that Vance's long-term isolation and obsession with the collection had created a distorted reality. But the forensic evidence undermined this strategy at every turn. The meticulous record-keeping, the strategic evasion of law enforcement, and the cold, calculating nature of his interactions with his victims all pointed to a man who was in complete control of his faculties. The jury, drawn from the surrounding county, listened intently as the prosecution painted a picture of a predator who had played a long game of psychological chess with the entire town of Oakhaven. The trial was becoming not just a prosecution of a murder, but an investigation into the nature of evil and the ways in which we allow it to flourish in the light of day. The impact of the trial on Oakhaven was profound. The town became a focal point for national media, with news crews setting up permanent operations. The pressure on the townspeople was immense. Every resident who had known Vance was scrutinized, their past relationships with him analyzed for signs of complicity or willful blindness. It was a period of intense public shame for Oakhaven, as the details of his crimes became a staple of true crime programming. The stigma was immediate and far-reaching. Property values dropped, businesses struggled, and the reputation of the town as a peaceful, idyllic community was permanently destroyed. The tragedy was that the residents had to navigate their personal trauma while simultaneously being a public spectacle. Their pain served up as entertainment for the rest of the world. During the defense's cross-examination, they attempted to paint a different picture of Vance. They brought in witnesses who testified to his charity work, his contributions to the community, and his seemingly unending kindness. They argued that these actions were genuine, a testament to a man who had been divided by two distinct personalities. But the prosecution countered this with the Chronicle of Shadows, showing that his philanthropy was merely another form of manipulation, a way to build social capital that he could use as a shield when things went wrong. The debate in the courtroom was a reflection of the battle within the town itself, a clash between the memory of the man they had known and the reality of the man who had been revealed. It was an uncomfortable, agonizing process of reconciliation that threatened to break the spirit of everyone involved. As the evidence against Vance mounted, the tension in the courtroom reached a breaking point. On one particular afternoon, a piece of evidence was introduced that no one had anticipated, a video recording from an old, hidden camera that Vance had installed in his bedroom in 1992. It showed the moments leading up to Sarah Miller's arrival. It was a grainy, black-and-white image, but it was crystal clear in its intent. It showed Vance preparing the room, setting the stage, and then waiting, a patient, silent watcher. The video was so shocking that the judge had to call a recess. For the Miller family, it was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was an intimate, recorded entry into the most private, most terrifying moment of their daughter's life. The video served as the absolute proof of premeditation, and it effectively destroyed any hope the defense had of arguing for mitigation. The final phase of the investigation turned toward identifying the other victims in the collection. As the police combed through the records found in the basement, they began to piece together a list of missing persons that had been filed over 30 years. Each name was a new, fresh wound for the community. The investigation became a massive, multi-jurisdictional effort involving the FBI and the state police. They began to exhume sites across the county, finding remains in places no one would have ever thought to look, under the foundation of a local park, in the walls of an abandoned barn, and in a shallow grave in the woods. Each discovery was a reminder of the scale of the horror, a testament to the fact that the Oak Haven case was not an outlier, but a centerpiece of a much larger, darker reality. The sheer number of victims meant that the trial would continue for months, if not years, as the prosecution sought justice for every life that Vance had stolen. The psychological toll on the investigators was also starting to show. Detective Thorne, who had become the face of the investigation, began to exhibit signs of severe secondary trauma. He struggled to sleep, his mind constantly occupied by the images of the evidence and the chilling calm of Vance's voice during the interrogation. He became a fixture in the precinct, living out of his office, his personal life falling apart as he became consumed by the need for closure. He wasn't alone. Many of the officers involved in the case were seeking professional help to manage the stress of what they had seen and what they had uncovered. The case was an all-consuming fire that burned through the lives of everyone it touched, leaving behind a scorched, barren landscape of memory and regret. As the trial continued, the public's interest transitioned from simple shock to a deeper, more philosophical inquiry into the nature of the crime. Journalists wrote long-form pieces on the Oak Haven syndrome, analyzing how a town could be so deeply misled and what it said about the way we perceive those around us. The story was picked up by documentaries and podcasts, each one trying to provide a new angle, a new interpretation of the facts. But none of them could capture the sheer, overwhelming, and visceral reality of what had occurred. The truth was something that could only be understood by those who lived it, those who felt the cold, hard weight of the reality that their lives had been fundamentally altered by a predator who had walked among them. The final piece of the evidence puzzle was perhaps the most disturbing, a set of letters that Vance had written to his victims' families over the years. They were letters of support, notes of sympathy, and offers of comfort. He had played the role of the grieving neighbor, the concerned citizen, and the supportive friend, all while knowing that he was the person responsible for their loss. The discovery of these letters was a psychological horror of the highest order. It suggested that Vance had not only killed their loved ones, but had also profited from their pain, deriving pleasure from their dependency on him for support. This realization was the final nail in the coffin of any public sympathy for him. He was not just a murderer. He was a parasite who had fed on the sorrow of his own victims' families. As the judge prepared to give the final instructions to the jury, the atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating. Every person in the room understood that this was the end of a long, painful chapter in the history of Oak Haven. The verdict would not just determine the fate of Arthur Vance, it would also be a symbolic act of justice for the entire community. It was a moment of profound, existential significance. The jury, a group of ordinary citizens who had been forced to grapple with the darkest aspects of human nature, sat in silence, their faces reflecting the burden of the responsibility they had been asked to shoulder. When the bailiff finally announced that they had reached a verdict, the sound was like a thunderclap in the stillness of the room. The final act of the drama unfolded with a solemnity that mirrored the gravity of the crimes. As the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief, anger, and deep, profound sadness. Guilty on all counts. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 34 years of silence. For the families of the victims, it was a moment of validation. For the town of Oak Haven, it was a moment of release. The monster had been unmasked, his crimes had been documented, and he would never be allowed to haunt the streets of their town again. But as the bailiffs led Vance away, a final, chilling note was sounded. He looked back one last time, not with remorse, but with a cold, calculated pride. He knew that, even though he was defeated, he had made his mark. He had forced the world to look at his work, and in that, he had achieved his final, dark ambition. As the trial concluded, the town began the process of healing. The sites of the murders were treated with a solemnity reserved for grave sites. The Victorian estate was torn down, the materials removed, and the land donated to a local charity for a memorial park. The process of rebuilding was not just physical, it was a psychological and communal effort to reclaim their identity from the shadow of the crime. The residents of Oakhaven were learning to live in a world where the lines between the known and the unknown, the safe and the dangerous, were forever blurred. They were becoming a community that was defined not by its past, but by its ability to endure in the face of the unimaginable. The legacy of the Oakhaven case would continue to echo through the halls of justice for years to come. It would be a case that would inform the training of future detectives, a study in the importance of skepticism, the value of forensic evidence, and the dangers of complacency. It would be a cautionary tale for families, a reminder to be more aware of their surroundings, and a call to action for communities to remain vigilant against the forces of darkness that hide in plain sight. But above all, it would be a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The story of the 1992 case is not just a tale of a murder. It is a story of a town that survived, a story of justice that was served, and a story of a truth that, no matter how long it was hidden, was eventually and inevitably brought to light. As the sun set over the now-cleared site of the Victorian estate, the town of Oakhaven seemed to breathe a little easier. The air was still cold, the memory was still fresh, and the pain was still real, but the suffocating weight of the uncertainty had been lifted. The cold case was closed, the questions were answered, and the truth had been laid bare. It was not a happy ending. There could be no happy ending to such a story, but it was a conclusion. It was a point of resolution in a narrative that had been stalled for too long. And in that resolution, there was the hope for a future that was, at the very least, free from the shadow of the man who had stolen their peace for 34 years. The final, lasting impact of the case was the realization that the town of Oakhaven was not unique. It was a microcosm of the world, a place where the dark and the light lived side by side, where the ordinary could hide the extraordinary, and where the most terrifying monsters were the ones we thought we knew. The case served as a reminder that we are all responsible for one another, and that the silence we maintain in the name of peace is often the environment in which the most horrific crimes are allowed to flourish. The lesson was hard one, but it was essential. And as the town continued its slow, deliberate process of healing, they carried with them the memory of the 1992 case, not as a weight, but as a map, a guide to a future where they would be more observant, more careful, and more committed to the truth. In the final assessment, the story of Arthur Vance is a testament to the fragility of our social contracts. We trust because we have to, we believe because it is easier, and we look away because the alternative is too painful to bear. The tragedy of Oakhaven was that it was a town built on these fragile foundations, and the crime of Arthur Vance was that he was the one who came along to show them how easily they could be broken. But in the end, it was also the strength of the community that won out. It was the persistence of the detectives, the resilience of the families, and the collective will of the town that finally brought the truth into the light. It was a victory, however bittersweet, that served as a beacon for all those who struggle in the shadow of the unknown. The case is now a part of the permanent record, a chapter in the history of Oakhaven that will be told, interpreted, and analyzed for generations. It is a story that has been transformed from a private trauma into a public document, a narrative that has been stripped of its secrecy and exposed to the scrutiny of history. It is a story that serves as a bridge between the past and the future, a reminder of the things that have been lost and the things that have been learned. And as the town of Oakhaven looks toward the future, it does so with a clearer, sharper, and more determined understanding of the nature of the world in which we live. The cold case is finally and forever at rest, and the town is, at last, allowed to define itself by something other than the shadow of its own darkest secret. As the years roll on, the story of the 1992 case will continue to be a subject of fascination and study. It will be the yardstick by which other investigations are measured, the standard by which cold cases are evaluated, and the symbol of the triumph of justice over the most enduring of mysteries. But for the people of Oakhaven, it will always be more than that. It will be a personal, intimate memory of a time of struggle, a time of horror, and a time of truth. It will be the story of how they survived the worst that the world had to offer, and how, in the end, they were able to face the darkness and reclaim their own lives. It is a story of survival, of courage, and of the enduring, quiet, and relentless power of the truth to eventually find its way home. The final word on the Oakhaven case is that it was a reminder that we are all, in our own way, detectives of our own lives. We are all responsible for the truths we see, the secrets we keep, and the silence we choose to maintain. The case of the 1992 murder was a tragedy of epic proportions, but it was also a crucible in which the character of an entire community was tested. And in the final analysis, Oakhaven proved that it was capable of greatness, that it was capable of truth, and that it was capable of justice. The cold case is closed, the case files are sealed, and the town continues on its path, changed, humbled, but ultimately stronger and more aware than it ever was before. The story concludes with the quietude of the present. The streets of Oakhaven are once again filled with the sounds of daily life. The schoolyard is alive with the chatter of children, and the houses on the hill are once again home to families. The darkness has been pushed back, the mystery solved, and the truth, no matter how heavy, has been accepted. It is a testament to the fact that no matter how long the shadows may grow, no matter how deep the secret may be buried, and no matter how much we may wish to turn away, the truth will always have a way of surfacing. The story of the 1992 murder is finally, truly, and completely at an end. And in that, there is a profound sense of peace. A peace that was fought for, a peace that was earned, and a peace that is now, and forever, owned by the people of Oakhaven. The case files of the Arthur Vance murder investigation are now housed in the state's archives, a thick, multi-volume testament to the horrific events that once gripped the community. The volumes are cold, impersonal records of pain, and they will likely be pulled only by researchers or students of criminal law. But they remain an objective record of a subjective agony. They document every interview, every piece of evidence, every forensic finding, and every legal maneuvering, all in an effort to bring a semblance of order to a chaotic and traumatic history. And so, the mystery is preserved, the secrets are laid out, and the horror is finally given a form that can be studied and understood. It is a fitting end to a case that was defined by its secrecy, to have everything finally and irrevocably out in the open. As we look back on the story of Oakhaven, we see not just the crime, but the context in which it occurred. We see the influence of the social dynamics, the power of the institutions, and the importance of individual agency in the face of systemic failure. We see the way in which our lives are woven together in ways we don't always understand, and how the actions of one individual can have consequences that ripple through generations. It is a story that offers us a window into the nature of humanity, and it is a story that serves as a reminder that we are all, in the end, responsible for the kind of world we choose to create. The final reflection on the Arthur Vance case is one of humble gratitude for the light. It is a reminder that there are always people, detectives, researchers, advocates, and investigators who are dedicated to the pursuit of truth and who refuse to let the darkness win. It is a reminder that justice, while often delayed, is a powerful force that can pierce even the most hardened secrets. And it is a reminder that no matter how much we may fear the unknown, it is only by facing it that we can truly begin to understand, to forgive, and to move on. The Oakhaven mystery is solved, the shadow has been lifted, and the town is, once again, allowed to be just a town, in the light of the day and in the quiet of the night. And so, we close the book on the tragedy of 1992. It is a story of a long, dark night that lasted for 34 years, and of the dawn that finally broke, revealing a world that was different, but that was at least, fundamentally, the truth. The cold case is finally over. The mystery is at rest. And the people of Oakhaven, who have lived with the weight of the secret for so long, are finally, truly free. It is a lesson in the power of time, the necessity of truth, and the enduring resilience of the human soul. May we always remember the lessons of Oakhaven, and may we always strive to ensure that such a story is never, ever allowed to happen again. The truth has arrived, and it is here to stay. The realization that Arthur Vance had not merely been an isolated killer, but rather a central node in a larger, darker network of criminality, began to emerge during the deep dive analysis of the secondary digital drives found in the attic. As investigators navigated the encrypted directories, they stumbled upon communication logs that suggested Vance had been an active participant in a dark web marketplace for illicit information and human capital for decades. This wasn't just about the 1992 murder anymore. It was about a structural decay in the safety of the entire region. The detectives, now working alongside federal task forces, realized that the Oakhaven Butcher moniker was perhaps too limiting. Vance was a facilitator, a man who sold secrets to the highest bidder, his Victorian house serving as a clandestine meeting point for individuals whose names were only whispered in the darkest corridors of government and high finance. The atmosphere at the station shifted from a methodical investigation to a frantic scramble to contain the spillover. The prosecutors, once confident in their straightforward case, now faced a labyrinthine landscape of potential obstruction. Powerful figures from the state capitol began to take an interest in the case, and not for the sake of justice. Files began to disappear from the registry. Servers that were scheduled for forensic imaging suddenly suffered catastrophic hardware failures. Detective Thorne, who had become the spearhead of this investigation, found himself being shadowed by unmarked cars and receiving anonymous phone calls that warned him to stop digging before he hit the bedrock. The case was no longer just about the cold case resolution of Sarah Miller's murder. It was an existential struggle to expose a rot that went all the way to the top of the state's elite hierarchy. The courtroom atmosphere grew even more claustrophobic as the trial progressed. The defense team, previously struggling with a mountain of forensic evidence, suddenly possessed resources that seemed limitless. They brought in high-priced consultants, psychological experts, and a revolving door of constitutional scholars who challenged every piece of digital evidence as an illegal invasion of privacy. The judge, an old-school jurist who had once been a friend of the Miller family, now found himself under immense, subtle pressure to limit the scope of the trial. The tension was palpable. Every time a new piece of evidence was presented, a digital link to an offshore account, a name of a high-profile associate found in a hidden file, the defense would react with a coordinated, surgical strike of motions, objections, and procedural delays designed to wear the court down. For the community of Oakhaven, this was a second, more insidious trauma. They had already mourned for their lost innocence. Now, they were being forced to confront the fact that they had been pawns in a much larger game. The town, which had pridefully seen itself as a forgotten corner of the world, was revealed to be a strategic asset. The geography of the textile mill, the history of the Victorian estate, and the very isolation of the town had been used as tools for people who treated human lives like chess pieces. The residents began to understand that their neighbors had been watched, their secrets had been harvested, and their safety had been sold out by a man they had trusted to coach their children and celebrate their harvests. The collective anger reached a boiling point, manifesting in protests that blocked the main arterial roads leading into town, demanding transparency and accountability. The psychological impact on the survivors, the families of the victims, was devastating. They were no longer just seeking answers for their loved ones. They were fighting a legal entity that seemed to have the power to disappear entire narratives. They started a grassroots movement, the Oakhaven Truth Project, to collect testimonies from anyone who had seen something, heard something, or been intimidated by Vance or his associates. They became a thorn in the side of the establishment, holding regular vigils and press conferences that forced the regional media to keep the spotlight on the trial. They were the moral conscience of the case, a group of grieving, determined people who refused to let the narrative of their town be rewritten by the very people who had orchestrated the nightmare. As the trial entered its midpoint, the prosecution managed to introduce a pivotal witness, a former associate of Vance, a man named Marcus Reed, who had served as his digital cleaner. Reed, having been granted immunity, provided a harrowing testimony that bridged the gap between the 1992 murder and the broader network. He described how Vance would select targets not just for his own collection, but to gain leverage over local business leaders and politicians. He revealed that the 1992 case was meant to be a test case, a way to see how much damage he could inflict on a small-town foundation without drawing outside federal scrutiny. The testimony was the first real crack in the wall of the defense's strategy. It humanized the monstrous scale of the crime, providing the jury with a clear, comprehensible motive for the systemic protection that Vance had enjoyed for so long. The courtroom fell silent as Reed detailed the specifics of the blackmail system. He told of hidden cameras in local hotels, of wiretapped lines in the municipal building, and of a complex system of ledger entries that linked Vance to major political donors. The names he dropped, names of people the jurors had seen in the newspapers, people they had voted for, people they had respected, sent a shockwave through the room. This was the moment the trial stopped being about one man and started being about the nature of power in their society. The journalists in the press gallery typed frantically, their stories catching fire on a national level. The trial of Arthur Vance had transcended the bounds of Oakhaven. It had become a national incident, a focal point for a culture hungry for a reckoning. But as the trial surged forward, the backlash began in earnest. The prosecution's office saw its budget slashed by the state legislature, citing fiscal responsibility. Detective Thorne was placed on administrative leave for an internal review of his investigative methods. The witnesses, including Marcus Reed, faced constant harassment, with some claiming they were being followed by people they didn't recognize. The trial became a war of attrition, with a judge struggling to maintain decorum as the defense team tried to paint the entire investigation as a partisan hit job. The atmosphere was one of high-stakes, high-pressure chaos, where every decision made in the courtroom could potentially bring down a regional power structure. Despite the pressure, the jury remained a steadfast group. They had seen the evidence, the photos, the diary, the ledger, and now the live testimony of someone who had seen the inner workings of a system. They were not easily swayed by the rhetoric of the high-priced defense attorneys. They saw through the smoke and mirrors to the raw, ugly truth at the heart of the matter. The trial continued to grind on, a slow, methodical accumulation of facts that painted an inescapable picture of guilt. The prosecution, led by a young, fierce district attorney who refused to be intimidated, kept the focus on the human cost of the crime. They kept the memory of Sarah Miller at the forefront, reminding everyone in the room that behind every ledger entry and every digital file was a person whose life had been violently interrupted. As the weeks turned into months, the trial took its toll on everyone involved. The judge was visibly thinner, the defense attorneys were frazzled and exhausted, and the jurors were living under a level of scrutiny they never could have imagined. Yet, the sense of purpose remained. They were not just deciding the guilt of one man, they were deciding the future of their community. They were deciding whether the truth had a place in their world, or whether they would be forced to live in the shadow of the secrets that had been used to control them. The trial had become a litmus test for the town's values, a crucible of truth that would either purify the community or burn it to the ground. The final phase of the trial involved the expert testimony of a cyberforensics team that had been flown in from the Capitol. They had successfully decrypted the remainder of the attic server, unveiling the full extent of the Oakhaven network. They presented a visual display of the connections, an intricate, spiderweb-like map that showed the flow of information, money, and leverage. It was a masterpiece of investigative clarity, an undeniable testament to the depth of the corruption. When the lead analyst concluded, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The defense had no counter, no motion, and no rebuttal. They sat in their chairs, looking deflated, as the weight of the evidence finally settled in the air like dust. The defense attorney's closing argument was a desperate attempt to frame Vance as a scapegoat, a man who had simply taken advantage of a system that was already broken. It was a cynical, nihilistic argument, and it fell flat on the ears of the jurors who had spent the last several months immersed in the reality of the damage Vance had caused. The prosecution, in contrast, gave a powerful, evocative closing that focused on the strength of the community, the resilience of the families, and the fundamental necessity of holding power to account. It was a speech that resonated with every person in the gallery, a call to action that transcended the courtroom and spoke to the very soul of the town. When the jury retired to deliberate, the town of Oakhaven was a cauldron of nerves. People gathered in the square, watching the screens of the courthouse, waiting for the word that would define their future. The silence was absolute, a collective holding of breath that lasted for 36 hours. The town had been hollowed out, its secrets exposed, and its foundations shaken. And now, it was waiting for the verdict that would tell them if it was all worth it. The air was heavy with anticipation, with the scent of a storm that was threatening to break, and with the desperate hope that, this time, justice would prevail. The verdict, when it finally arrived, was a landslide. Guilty on all counts, including conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering, in addition to the original murder charges. The courtroom exploded, not with joy, but with an overwhelming, cathartic release. The families held each other, sobbing in the front rows, their struggle finally vindicated. The jurors, some with tears in their eyes, looked relieved to have finally been able to fulfill their duty. The trial was over, the mystery was solved, and the weight of the secrets had been lifted, replaced by the heavy, sobering reality of the truth. It was a victory, but it was a victory of sorrow, a recognition of how much had been lost and how much work was left to be done to repair the damage. The aftermath of the trial was a period of intense public reevaluation. The political figures who had been linked to the Oakhaven network were forced into resignations. The local police force was dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up, and the town itself began the long, slow process of reclaiming its identity. The notoriety of the case would never truly fade, but the nature of that notoriety changed. Oakhaven was no longer just the site of a horrific crime. It was the birthplace of a movement for transparency and accountability. It was a beacon for other communities that had been victimized by similar webs of secrecy, a testament to the fact that no matter how entrenched the power, no matter how deep the corruption, the truth can always be brought to light. As the dust settled, Detective Thorne stood at the entrance of the courthouse, looking out over the square. He was a tired, changed man, but he was also a man who had done what he set out to do. He had followed the thread, he had faced the darkness, and he had come out on the other side with the truth. He knew the story wasn't over, that there would be years of appeals, civil trials, and investigative follow-ups, but the hardest part was behind them. The cold case was closed, the monster was behind bars, and the community of Oakhaven was, for the first time in 34 years, truly awake. He turned away from the courthouse and started to walk home, the sun setting behind him, casting long, peaceful shadows over the valley, the wind carrying the scent of a new beginning, a beginning that was founded on the bedrock of the truth. This, the story of Oakhaven, is a monument to the human condition. It is a story of how we handle the shadows, how we confront the things we fear, and how we learn to see the world as it really is, not as we want it to be. The case was a tragedy, a horror, and a challenge, but it was also an opportunity. It was an opportunity for a community to grow, to learn, and to come together in the name of justice. And as the story of the 1992 case moves from the headlines into the history books, it will serve as a constant reminder that we are never alone in our struggles, that we are stronger than we realize, and that, in the end, the truth is the only foundation upon which we can truly build our lives. The final piece of the record, the official report of the investigation, was released a year later, a monumental document that detailed the entire scope of the Oakhaven scandal. It became a required text in police academies and criminology departments, a case study in the importance of vigilance, the dangers of institutional silence, and the power of individual perseverance. It was the legacy of Sarah Miller, a legacy that turned her tragic end into a catalyst for a safer, more transparent future for everyone. And as the town continued to evolve, the memory of that long, cold case became a part of their collective soul, a permanent, quiet, and resilient reminder that even in the darkest of nights, there is always the potential for the light. The story of the Oakhaven Butcher is finally and fully laid to rest. The files are closed, the courtroom is empty, and the town is left to deal with the quiet work of living. But the lessons of those years will remain, etched into the character of the community, woven into the fabric of its future, and held in the hearts of those who lived through the nightmare and emerged, changed, but ultimately whole. The mystery is solved, the shadow is gone, and the truth, at last, stands in the sun, clear, piercing, and undeniably real. The cold case is finally, for the first time in history, simply a part of the past. The final echoes of the 1992 case are not in the sounds of the courtroom or the headlines of the news, but in the quiet, everyday moments of the life in Oakhaven. It is in the way people look each other in the eye, the way they talk about their concerns, and the way they come together to solve the problems of their town. It is in the resilience of the families, the dedication of the investigators, and the courage of the citizens who stood up for the truth. It is in the way the town has taken its tragedy and turned it into a source of strength, a foundation for a future that is, finally, their own. The cold case is a memory, a part of their history, but the future of Oakhaven is theirs to write. The story concludes with a view from the valley, where the town lights twinkle under the vast, open sky. The silence of the night is not the silence of a secret, but the silence of a peace that has been hard-won. The investigation has ended, the truth is known, and the community is together. It is a poignant, powerful, and lasting image, a town that was brought to its knees, but that stood back up, wiser, stronger, and more connected than ever before. The legacy of Sarah Miller is not just a murder case, but a testament to the endurance of the human spirit, a story that will live on for generations, a silent, powerful, and eternal echo of a truth that was, in the end, louder than any secret could ever be. And so, we find ourselves at the end of the narrative, a journey that has taken us from the dark, damp streets of a forgotten town to the blinding glare of the national spotlight. We have seen the darkest impulses of humanity and the greatest strengths of a community. We have seen the power of secrets and the overwhelming force of the truth. We have seen a cold case become a crucible, and we have seen a town survive the fire. The story of the Oakhaven case is, in the final analysis, a reflection of our own world, a world where the darkness is always present, but where the light, if we are brave enough to seek it, is always stronger. The mystery is closed, the story is told, and the truth remains. The case of the 1992 murder is officially at an end, and the town of Oakhaven, through the grace of its resilience and the strength of its spirit, finds itself, finally and truly, looking forward to the dawn. The legal machinery of the state, now fully energized by the seismic findings of the Oakhaven investigation, began to grind with a relentless, mechanical precision that made the initial trial feel like a mere dress rehearsal. As the appellate phase loomed, the prosecution, led by a team of battle-hardened veterans from the Attorney General's office, shifted their focus from the singular acts of Arthur Vance to the expansive, systemic facilitation that had allowed him to flourish for 3 decades. The narrative was no longer about a lone wolf. It was about the den of wolves that had surrounded him, protecting the perimeter while he hunted in the center. The revelation that local law enforcement had not just been incompetent, but had actively participated in the shuffling of evidence, a process of intentional bureaucratic erasure, sent the town into a state of structural panic. The courthouse, which had become a second home for the residents of Oakhaven, was now the site of intense, multi-layered hearings. These were not public spectacles like the trial. They were cold, clinical, and devastatingly efficient. Witness after witness, many of whom were disgraced former officers or compromised municipal officials, were brought in to testify under the threat of perjury. Their stories, when stitched together, revealed a terrifying blueprint of institutional betrayal. They spoke of the golden rule of the department, a silent, unspoken mandate to prioritize the reputation of the town above the lives of the outsiders or the marginalized. This was the dark underbelly of small-town life, a social contract that had traded justice for the comfort of denial, and it was being dismantled piece by piece under the harsh glare of federal oversight. Detective Thorne, still recovering from the psychological exhaustion of the primary investigation, found himself sitting in the gallery, watching as the systemic failures he had fought to uncover were laid bare. Each testimony was a confirmation of his darkest suspicions, a validation of the late nights he had spent obsessing over files that didn't make sense. But rather than feeling a sense of vindication, he felt a deepening sense of sorrow. The truth, in all its complexity, was far more disheartening than the mystery had ever been. A mystery could be solved with evidence and intuition. A systemic route required a fundamental transformation of the society itself, a task that felt Herculean, if not impossible. The town was facing a mirror, and the reflection was far more distorted than they had ever imagined. Meanwhile, the Miller family found themselves at the epicenter of a new, complex legal landscape. They were now the plaintiffs in a sweeping civil litigation against the municipal government, a case that sought not just financial restitution, but an acknowledgement of the profound breach of duty that had allowed their daughter's killer to remain free. The courtroom proceedings for this civil trial were marked by a grim, methodical focus on the timeline of the investigation. Every phone call, every document, and every report that had been ignored or mishandled was put on display. The attorneys for the city, desperate to mitigate the liability, fought tooth and nail to frame the failures as simple oversight, but the sheer volume of evidence, the chronicle of shadows that Vance had kept, showed a pattern of conduct that was clearly malicious. The psychological impact on the jury in this civil phase was unique. They were tasked not just with determining guilt, but with calculating the value of a life that had been stolen by the very institutions meant to protect it. The process was agonizing. Expert witnesses, forensic psychologists, sociologists, and criminologists were brought in to describe the ripple effects of such a profound failure of care. They spoke of the loss of trust, the disintegration of family structures, and the long-term trauma that had been compounded by the state's refusal to acknowledge the reality of the threat. It was a sobering, educational experience for the jury, who began to see their own town not as a static, idyllic landscape, but as a dynamic, deeply flawed system that had been fundamentally compromised by its own desire to look away. As the proceedings continued, the media attention began to shift. The story was no longer just a cold case solved narrative. It had evolved into a broader critique of institutional power and the fragility of local governance in the United States. National outlets began to run long-form investigations, interviewing the residents of Oak Haven about the cultural factors that had sustained such a long period of blindness. The town became a case study for the bystander effect on a macrosocial scale. Residents who had once been anonymous citizens found themselves being asked to account for their own silences, their own observations, and their own roles in maintaining the status quo. It was a painful, invasive process, but it was an essential one, forcing a collective reckoning that was long overdue. The defense's last-ditch effort to delay the proceedings involved the introduction of a new, highly questionable witness, an elderly former employee of the textile mill who claimed to have seen others in the vicinity on the night of the murder. It was a clear, tactical attempt to inject doubt into the airtight narrative, a move that the judge swiftly overruled as being unsubstantiated and highly prejudicial. This final attempt to obfuscate the truth was the last gasp of the defense's strategy, and it served only to reinforce the jury's conviction. The prosecution didn't even need to mount a significant rebuttal. The evidence they had already provided was so overwhelming that the attempt to introduce hearsay was seen as a desperate act of a sinking ship. As the jury retired to deliberate on the civil case, the town of Oak Haven was once again caught in a state of suspended animation. But the feeling in the streets was different this time. There was less raw anger and more of a somber, reflective resolve. The community had been through so much: the discovery of the horror, the initial trial, the unfolding of the institutional scandal, and now the long, arduous process of seeking accountability. They had been stretched to the breaking point, but they hadn't broken. They had instead begun the slow, painful process of adaptation. They were learning to talk about the things they used to avoid, to acknowledge the reality of their shared past, and to demand more from the systems they had once taken for granted. When the verdict was read, a judgment that awarded the Miller family a substantial settlement and mandated a total, federally monitored overhaul of the municipal police department, there was no cheering. There was only a profound sense of quiet. It was the sound of a chapter closing, of a debt finally being acknowledged, and of a future finally being permitted to exist. The Miller family, led by Sarah's mother, issued a brief statement, thanking the court and the community for the hard work of bringing the truth to light. But she emphasized that the money, the judgment, and the systemic reforms could never replace what had been lost. Her words, carried by the wind across the square, served as a final, resonant reminder of the cost of the tragedy. The implementation of the federal consent decree for the police department was a long, contentious process. It involved the hiring of an entirely new administrative team, the implementation of new training programs focused on forensic accountability and victim services, and the creation of an independent oversight board made up of local residents. It was a radical, transformative approach to local law enforcement, one that aimed to turn the page on the era of secrecy and replace it with a culture of transparency and proactive engagement. The process was slow and often frustrating, but it was a concrete, tangible manifestation of the changes that the Oakhaven case had sparked. It was a legacy that would outlive the memory of the crime itself. As the Oversight Board began its work, the town of Oakhaven started to exhibit signs of a genuine, if tentative, renewal. New, younger families began to move in, attracted by the affordable property values and the town's newfound commitment to transparency and social progress. The cultural landscape began to shift, with the opening of new community centers, the creation of public art installations that honored the memory of the victims, and a renewed emphasis on civic education. The town was no longer trying to hide from its past. It was beginning to integrate that past into the narrative of its future, acknowledging the mistakes of the previous generation as a necessary foundation for the growth of the next. Detective Thorne, though he officially retired from the force shortly after the conclusion of the civil proceedings, remained a fixture in Oakhaven. He was often seen in the local library, or sitting on a park bench watching the town as it worked to reinvent itself. He was a quiet, observant figure, a man who had seen too much but who still held onto a kernel of hope for the humanity of the place. He was the bridge between the old Oakhaven, with its dark, suffocating secrets, and the new, more resilient community that was emerging from the ashes. His presence was a reminder of the cost of the journey and of the necessity of the vigilance that the town would now have to maintain in perpetuity. The study of the Oakhaven case continued to grow, becoming a fixture in the field of forensic social psychology. Scholars from across the country came to study the town's trajectory, analyzing the way it had collapsed under the weight of its secrets and the way it had, through sheer collective effort, managed to rebuild. The story was no longer just a true crime phenomenon. It had evolved into a complex, multidimensional study of human resilience and the social mechanics of accountability. It was a lesson that resonated deeply with the modern world, as more and more communities began to grapple with their own histories of hidden trauma and institutional betrayal. The final resting place of the Arthur Vance evidence, the Chronicle of Shadows, the digital servers, and the recovered items from the basement, was not in a museum or a display case. It was housed in a dedicated, secure archive designed for academic research. It was a way of ensuring that the evidence of his crimes would never be lost, never be hidden, and never be allowed to fade from the public record. It was a way of ensuring that the story would continue to be told, that the lessons would continue to be learned, and that the victims of the butcher would continue to be remembered as the focal point of the narrative. The archive was a final act of respect, a commitment to the truth that went beyond the immediate needs of the legal process. As we conclude this segment of the narrative, it is worth reflecting on the power of the journey that Oakhaven has undergone. From the darkness of the 1992 disappearance to the blinding light of the modern reckoning, the town has been transformed. It is no longer defined by the monster that lived in its midst, but by the community that refused to stay silent in the face of his darkness. It is a story of human strength, a story of the power of the truth, and a story of the enduring nature of justice. And as Oakhaven continues to write its next chapter, it carries with it the hard-won wisdom of its past, a permanent, quiet, and profound understanding of what it means to be a truly free and transparent society. The story of Oakhaven is now an indelible part of the landscape of American true crime, a narrative that has shaped the way we think about the relationship between the individual, the institution, and the community. It has demonstrated the importance of vigilance, the necessity of accountability, and the power of the truth to change the world. And as long as there are people who are willing to ask the hard questions, who are willing to face the darkness, and who are willing to stand together in the name of what is right, then the memory of Sarah Miller and the truth of Oakhaven will continue to shine as a beacon of hope in the often shadowy world of our collective experience. The final reflection on this chapter of the story is one of profound, bittersweet hope. The work is not done, and the process of healing is and will always be a living, ongoing, and vital part of the community's life. But the town has achieved something truly remarkable. It has emerged from the depths of its own tragedy, not broken or destroyed, but stronger, more aware, and more committed to the ideals of justice and transparency than ever before. The cold case is finally over, and the future, once shrouded in the mist of secrets and lies, is now, at long last, within the reach of the people who call Oakhaven home. The journey has been long, the cost has been high, and the lessons have been profound, but in the end, it was a journey worth taking, for it led them to the only thing that truly matters, the truth. The quiet, steady progress of the town of Oakhaven serves as a reminder that the most significant changes in our lives often come from the most unexpected and painful of places. It is in the recognition of our failures that we find the capacity for our greatest growth. The story of the Oakhaven butcher will always be a part of the town's DNA, but it is no longer the thing that dictates its fate. It is a reminder of the potential for darkness and the equal, if not greater, potential for the light. As we look at the town today, we see not a crime scene, but a community, a group of people who have learned that the most important thing we can do for one another is to be truthful, to be vigilant, and to stand together in the face of whatever darkness the world might bring our way. The history of the investigation is a testament to the fact that even in a world that is often governed by self-interest and convenience, there are those who hold to a higher standard. The detectives, the prosecutors, the witnesses, and the citizens who stood up for the truth were all, in their own way, champions of a better world. They were the ones who refused to be discouraged, who persisted when the path was unclear, and who ultimately succeeded in bringing the light into the most hidden of places. Their efforts, their commitment, and their strength are the true legacy of the Oakhaven case. They remind us that the fight for justice is never over, but that it is a fight worth having because it is the only way to preserve the dignity of the human experience. As we look to the horizon, we see the town of Oakhaven moving forward, with a sense of purpose and a spirit of determination that has been forged in the crucible of its past. The cold case has been solved, the truth has been spoken, and the town is, finally, at peace. It is a fragile peace, to be sure, the peace that comes after a long, intense, and draining conflict, but it is a peace that is built on a solid foundation. And as the residents go about their lives, they do so with a deeper understanding of the world, a greater appreciation for the importance of truth, and an unwavering commitment to the values that have allowed them to survive the nightmare and emerge stronger than ever before. The saga of the 1992 Oakhaven murder case is now complete. Every detail, every connection, and every consequence has been documented, analyzed, and integrated into the collective history of the community. The files have been archived, the courthouse has been quieted, and the town has been changed forever. But the story, the real, human story, will continue to be told. It will be the story that parents pass down to their children, the story that researchers study for years to come, and the story that will always serve as a reminder of the power of the truth to change the lives of the people who are brave enough to seek it. And in that, the story of Oakhaven, the story of the butcher, and the story of the long, cold wait for justice finds its ultimate, final, and most meaningful resolution. The final scene of the investigation is a simple one, a quiet afternoon in the park that was built on the site of the former Victorian estate. People are walking their dogs, children are playing on the swings, and the sun is casting a warm, gentle glow across the landscape. It is a peaceful, ordinary, and beautiful day. It is a scene that, 34 years ago, would have been unimaginable. And yet, here it is, the result of a journey that started with a scream, a glove, and a cold case that seemed destined to remain a mystery forever. The transformation of the town, the growth of the people, and the resolution of the case are the greatest achievements of all. They are the proof that even in the face of the most daunting and horrific of circumstances, there is always the possibility of a new beginning, a new truth, and a new life. And so, we leave the town of Oakhaven, not as it was when the investigation began, but as it is now, a place that has faced its darkest demons, overcome its deepest fears, and reclaimed its right to exist in the light of the truth. The story of the Oakhaven case is a final, definitive, and powerful testament to the fact that justice, while often delayed, is a force that can never be fully silenced. It is a reminder that the truth is always there, waiting for the right moment to be brought to light, and that no matter how long the wait may be, the effort to uncover it is always worth it. The case is closed, the secrets are gone, and the future, bright and clear, is waiting to be lived. The echoes of the Oakhaven case had long since settled into the bedrock of local history, but for those who had been in the trenches of the investigation, the psychological aftermath remained a vivid, living landscape. As the town transitioned into its post-trial reality, a different kind of forensic work began, the social and personal reconstruction of a broken community. The Oakhaven Truth Project, originally a scrappy grassroots effort led by the Miller family, had expanded into a formal, non-profit foundation dedicated to supporting victims of unsolved crimes and lobbying for statewide legislative reform regarding the handling of cold cases. It was a tangible, positive output from a well of misery, demonstrating how the town was choosing to transmute its collective trauma into a mechanism for public safety. This transition from a site of horror to a center for victim advocacy was the final, defiant act of a community that refused to be defined by the butcher's design. The foundation's headquarters, located in a renovated building on the edge of the town square, served as both a memorial and a resource center. It housed an extensive archive of public records from the investigation, not to sensationalize the crime, but to educate the public on the warning signs of predatory behavior and the critical necessity of institutional transparency. The Miller family, who had once been the faces of an agonizing, unsolvable mystery, were now the architects of a movement. Sarah's mother, in particular, had become a formidable force in the state legislature, pushing for the Miller Act, which mandated the periodic, independent review of all cold cases older than 10 years. Her advocacy was not rooted in vengeance, but in a profound, searing empathy for other families who were currently trapped in the same limbo she had inhabited for over 3 decades. The internal reconstruction of the town's police department, mandated by the federal consent decree, was nearing completion by the 3rd anniversary of the verdict. The new administration, handpicked for their commitment to reform, had successfully purged the old guard mentality that had allowed Vance to operate in the shadows for so long. They had implemented a community-first policing model characterized by high levels of transparency, regular public forums, and an open-door policy for anonymous tips. It was a stark departure from the era of the Golden Rule, and it served as a model for rural police departments across the state. The town had essentially performed an autopsy on its own governance and had stitched itself back together with a new, stronger set of priorities. However, the psychological scars of the town's residents remained deep. In the local schools, counselors were still helping students navigate the legacy of the Oakhaven butcher, teaching them how to process the reality that their hometown had been a hunting ground. The local church, once the primary setting for Vance's public charades, had undergone a period of intense soul-searching. They had held a series of public dialogues, inviting external mediators to lead the congregation in confronting how they had been manipulated and what it meant to hold faith in a community that had been so profoundly deceived. The process was messy and often painful, but it was essential for the spiritual reconciliation of a town that had felt collectively violated by the hypocrisy of its most visible pillar of virtue. As the years began to stack up, the public's perception of Oakhaven started to evolve once more. The initial morbid curiosity that had characterized the post-arrest period had faded, replaced by a nuanced, respectful acknowledgement of the town's resilience. Documentaries were still being made, but they were no longer focused on the gory details of the 1992 murder. They were focused on the Oakhaven model, the way a community could survive a total systemic collapse and emerge with a renewed sense of purpose. It was a narrative of healing that resonated globally, showing that the resolution of a cold case is not just about catching a killer. It is about the long, exhausting, and necessary work of reclaiming one's own reality from the wreckage of a secret. Detective Thorne, now officially retired, found his purpose in mentoring the new generation of investigators. He was a regular lecturer at the State Police Academy, where he taught a course titled The Architecture of Silence. He didn't just talk about forensics or DNA profiling. He talked about the social conditions that allow predators to operate, the importance of questioning one's own assumptions, and the moral duty to follow the thread, regardless of where it leads or who it might implicate. He was an unconventional instructor, quiet, intense, and deeply skeptical of easy answers, but he was highly effective. He was teaching the next generation to be the kind of detectives he had had to become, the kind who valued the truth above the comfort of the status quo. The Chronicle of Shadows, Arthur Vance's private diary, had been the primary exhibit in the academic archive, and it continued to draw scholars from the fields of criminology and psychiatry. It was a chilling, unfiltered look into the mind of a predator who had operated with absolute, calculated intent. Yet, for all its detail, the scholars noted one major omission. There was no mention of remorse. The diary was a ledger of pride, a catalogue of accomplishments that Vance had viewed as his greatest work. This, more than anything else, was the most terrifying realization for those who studied it. The idea that some people are not born out of trauma, but out of a fundamental, immutable absence of empathy. It was a lesson that had profound implications for the way we conceptualize criminality and the way we approach the rehabilitation of the incarcerated. As the town of Oakhaven continued its steady, quiet evolution, the memory of Sarah Miller was honored in a way that was both subtle and permanent. A memorial garden had been established on the site of the textile mill, a place where people could come to sit, to reflect, and to exist in the quiet that had been denied to the victims for so long. It was not a place of mourning, but a place of life, filled with trees, flowers, and the sounds of the neighborhood. It was a testament to the fact that the life stolen in 1992 had not been forgotten, and that its impact, rather than ending with her death, had become the catalyst for the rebirth of her community. The economic recovery of the town, which had been in jeopardy during the height of the investigation, was also beginning to show signs of stability. New, diverse businesses had replaced the ones that had failed during the crisis, and the town had established a successful arts and culture district that drew visitors from the surrounding counties. It was a town that had regained its confidence, not through a return to the past, but through the hard-won construction of a future that was, in every way, better than what had come before. They were no longer the town that hid its monsters. They were the town that had learned to stand in the light. The final, lasting impact of the Oakhaven case on the national conversation was the mainstreaming of the cold case as a category of cultural, social, and legal priority. The Oakhaven Truth Project had successfully lobbied for the creation of an independent, federal task force designed to provide resources for rural jurisdictions that lacked the infrastructure to handle long-term investigations. This was the true, lasting legacy of Sarah Miller's murder. A change in the way the justice system operated on a national level, a commitment to the idea that the passage of time should never be an excuse for the cessation of justice. The cold case, which had once been a closed, dark room in the basement of history, had been opened, aired out, and transformed into a cornerstone of a more accountable, more vigilant, and more compassionate society. As we look at the Oakhaven of today, we see a community that is comfortable with the complexities of its own identity. They are no longer pretending to be an idyllic, untouchable paradise. They are a real place, with real challenges, real history, and a real, grounded commitment to one another. They have learned that the greatest threat to a community is not the stranger at the gate. but the silence within the walls. They have learned that safety is not something that is given, but something that is created through transparency, through vigilance, and through the refusal to let fear dictate the terms of our existence. The cold case is finally over, but the work, the important, necessary human work of living together, is just beginning. The legacy of the 1992 murder investigation is now a finished, permanent piece of our collective experience. It is a story that has been fully told, from the first discovery of the evidence to the final overhaul of the local institutions. It is a story that serves as a lighthouse in the dark, a clear, reliable signal of the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of the truth. It is a story that will live on for generations, not just as a cautionary tale of a monster, but as a story of the people who refused to stop, who refused to turn away, and who, in the end, brought the truth back into the light. The mystery is solved, the shadow is gone, and the future, once hidden in the fog of a cold case, is finally, at long last, within our reach. The final image of the Oakhaven story is a quiet, hopeful one. The sun rising over the valley, the morning mist clearing from the fields, and the people of the town beginning their day, one that is built on the foundation of the truth they fought so hard to uncover. The investigation, the trial, the scandal, the reforms, they are all part of the past, a sequence of events that has left an indelible mark on the landscape of the community. But the present and the future belong to them, to the citizens, to the families, and to the children who will grow up in a town that is defined by its resilience, its awareness, and its commitment to the light. The cold case is closed, the story is told, and the journey toward the future is, in the most meaningful way, only just beginning. This long, intensive look at the Oakhaven case has been a journey through the most difficult of human experiences, but it has also been a witness to the most hopeful of human capacities. We have seen how a single act of violence can ripple out to tear apart a community, and we have seen how the collective act of seeking the truth can begin to mend it. We have learned that the most important thing we can do for one another is to bear witness, to acknowledge the reality of our shared struggles, and to never let the darkness of a cold case become the defining feature of our existence. The mystery of the 1992 murder is gone, and in its place is a reality that is complex, challenging, but ultimately full of the possibility of a better way of life. The final word on the Oakhaven mystery is one of acknowledgement. We acknowledge the victims whose lives were stolen and whose stories were suppressed for far too long. We acknowledge the detectives, the investigators, and the advocates who labored in the face of insurmountable odds to bring the truth to light. And we acknowledge the people of Oakhaven who lived through the nightmare, who confronted their own failings, and who emerged from the fire with a newfound sense of purpose. Theirs is the story that matters, and theirs is the triumph that will be remembered long after the files are archived and the case itself is nothing more than a footnote in the history of crime. The truth has arrived, it has been heard, and it has set the town free. The story concludes with the quiet, steady rhythm of a town that has finally found its own voice. The secrets of the past are no longer secrets. They are part of the historical record, a foundation upon which a new, more honest future is being built. The cold case of Sarah Miller is a closed chapter, but the Book of Oakhaven is still being written, and it is a book that is being written with a sense of clarity, a sense of honesty, and a sense of hope that is as powerful as it is profound. The mystery of the 1992 case was a heavy, dark shadow that hung over the town for 34 years, but the light that has finally broken through is brighter, more enduring, and more life-affirming than anything the darkness could have ever tried to extinguish. As we turn the final page, we see the town of Oakhaven, not as it was, but as it is, a living, breathing testament to the power of the truth. It is a town that has looked into the abyss and come back, a town that has confronted the worst that humanity has to offer and found the best within itself. It is a story that reminds us all that there is no case too old, no secret too deep, and no shadow too long to eventually be pierced by the relentless, inevitable, and transformative light of the truth. The story of the Oakhaven butcher is officially at an end, and the story of the Oakhaven community, a story of resilience, awareness, and renewal, is only just beginning. And in that, there is the final, ultimate, and most beautiful kind of closure. The narrative of the 1992 murder, which had once been a source of shame, silence, and suspicion, is now a source of strength, identity, and shared purpose. The people of Oakhaven have taken the most horrific aspect of their history and transformed it into a symbol of their capacity for justice and their commitment to one another. They have shown that while we cannot change the past, we can absolutely determine how it shapes our future. The case is closed, the story is complete, and the truth has been secured, allowing the community to step out of the shadow and into the clear, bright light of a new, authentic, and truly resilient way of being. In the end, all the questions have been answered, all the evidence has been presented, and all the justice that could be served has been rendered. The case of Arthur Vance is now a closed book, a case file that will gather dust in an archive, but it will never be forgotten. It will be the benchmark for a more diligent, more transparent, and more accountable justice system. It will be the guiding star for victims' advocates everywhere. And most importantly, it will be the living, breathing, and enduring history of a town that discovered the strength to reclaim its own story, to define its own truth, and to walk, at last, in the light of its own resilience. The cold case is finally over, the mystery is gone, and the town of Oakhaven, whole and changed, moves forward into the future unburdened and free. The temporal distance between the events of 1992 and the eventual resolution of the Oakhaven case had created a unique form of collective amnesia, a defense mechanism that had allowed the town to maintain the illusion of innocence while the truth lay rotting in the literal and figurative foundations of the community. As the legal proceedings concluded and the Federal Oversight Board began its long-term tenure, the town found itself in a period of intense, often painful, sociological transition. The Oakhaven model of post-trauma recovery became the subject of intense academic interest, drawing sociologists and anthropologists who sought to understand how a community could dismantle a culture of silence that had been so successfully maintained for over 3 decades. They found that the process was not linear. It was a chaotic, often circular journey of revelation, denial, resentment, and finally, a fragile, hard-won acceptance. One of the most profound shifts occurred within the local school district. Educators, realizing that the generation born after 1992 had grown up in the shadow of a mystery they were never allowed to ask about, introduced a new curriculum component focused on civic literacy and the ethics of memory. Students were encouraged to research the local history of the Oakhaven butcher case, utilizing the public archives and interviewing the generation that had lived through the trial. This intergenerational dialogue proved to be a catalyst for healing, as it allowed the younger generation to process the collective trauma as a historical event rather than a present, looming threat. By institutionalizing the memory of the crime, the town ensured that the complacency of the past could not be easily repeated. The physical landscape of Oakhaven continued to be reclaimed piece by piece. The site of the former textile mill, once an icon of urban decay and hidden horrors, had been fully transformed into the Miller Memorial Park, a multifunctional space that hosted local markets, youth athletics, and commemorative events. It was a reclaiming of space, turning a site of trauma into a site of communal life. This physical transformation was symbolic of the town's broader shift. They were no longer a community defined by the things they kept buried, but by the spaces they opened up to one another. The park served as a constant reminder that the town had not just survived its history, but had actively integrated it into a larger, healthier narrative of growth. As the years progressed, the role of Detective Thorne, the man who had effectively forced the town to confront its past, became the subject of a nuanced local discourse. He had transitioned from a divisive figure, the outsider who had come in and shattered their peaceful illusions, to a figure of profound respect. He was often invited to town hall meetings to discuss the ongoing work of the consent decree, and his insights were valued not for their investigative utility, but for their moral clarity. He had become the town's unofficial conscience, a man who had seen the worst of what they had been capable of, yet had stayed to help them become something better. His presence was a quiet, constant reminder that the work of justice is not a singular act, but a lifelong commitment to the truth. The legal and institutional ramifications of the Oakhaven case continued to ripple outward through the state's judicial system. The Miller Act, which had been championed by Sarah's mother, was proving to be a model for similar legislation in neighboring states. It established a rigorous framework for the mandatory reevaluation of cold cases, ensuring that the passage of time could no longer be used as a cloak for institutional inaction. The case of the Oakhaven butcher was being studied in law schools across the country as a landmark example of how systemic silence can be dismantled by a combination of persistent investigative work and community-led advocacy. The tragedy of 1992 had been transformed into a tool for systemic reform, a legacy that reached far beyond the boundaries of the town itself. The personal lives of the victims' families, who had once been isolated in their grief, were now part of a broader, supportive network. The foundation they had helped establish had become a vital hub for families across the region who were struggling with the long-term impact of unsolved crimes. They provided resources, legal guidance, and, most importantly, a space for shared experience. They had learned that the most effective way to combat the isolation that comes with tragedy is to build a community of support. By opening their own pain to the public, they had created a path for others to find their own resolutions, turning their personal losses into a collective gain. The town's economy, once fragile and overly dependent on a few local industries, had successfully diversified. The notoriety of the case, while initially damaging, had eventually been leveraged to promote Oakhaven as a place of resilience and renewal. Businesses that prioritized social responsibility and ethical practices were drawn to the town, attracted by its commitment to transparency and its progressive stance on civic engagement. The town had essentially rebranded itself, not as the site of a horrific crime, but as a place that had successfully navigated the most difficult of challenges and come out on the other side. This was a testament to the fact that a community is not defined by its worst moments, but by its ability to learn from them and to evolve. The psychological research on the Oakhaven effect highlighted the importance of collective naming. By officially naming the monster, by officially documenting the crimes, and by officially memorializing the victims, the town had taken control of the narrative. They had moved from a state of passive endurance to one of active participation in the creation of their own history. The significance of this cannot be overstated. The ability to tell one's own story, especially when that story has been dictated by the actions of others, is the essence of psychological recovery. Oakhaven had reclaimed its voice, and in doing so, it had silenced the lingering, coercive influence of the man who had once held them hostage in their own ignorance. As the town approached the 10-year anniversary of the conviction of Arthur Vance, the mood in Oakhaven was one of contemplative pride. They had successfully navigated the most difficult period in their modern history, and they had done so with a sense of integrity and resolve that had garnered international recognition. The anniversary was not marked by a return to the morbid details of the crime, but by a community-wide event that celebrated the progress they had made, the reforms they had enacted, and the future they were continuing to build. It was a day of community, a day of reflection, and a day of gratitude for the resilience they had shown in the face of the unimaginable. The records of the investigation, which had been so difficult to secure during the early days of the search for the truth, were now meticulously organized and accessible in the public archives. This was a direct result of the town's new, uncompromising policy on transparency. They had realized that the greatest weapon against the return of the darkness was the public's ability to see and understand the past. The archives served as a permanent, searchable testament to the facts of the case, ensuring that history could not be rewritten, forgotten, or suppressed. It was a foundational change in the town's relationship with its own records, a step that signaled their commitment to a future built on evidence rather than on silence. The evolving understanding of the Oakhaven case had also changed the way the regional media covered true crime stories. They had moved away from the sensationalist, victim-blaming, and narrative-driven approach that had initially plagued the reporting of the 1992 case. They were now more sensitive, more investigative, and more focused on the long-term impact of crimes on the community. They had learned from the mistakes of their predecessors, and they had adopted a standard of reporting that prioritized the truth and the dignity of the victims. This change in the journalistic landscape was another, quieter, but equally important legacy of the Oakhaven investigation. The town's transformation was a slow, sometimes agonizingly steady process, but it was one that yielded profound results. They had learned that the truth is not something that is solved once and for all. It is a living, breathing reality that must be tended, maintained, and defended every day. They had learned that a community is not an abstract entity, but a collection of individuals who are all responsible for the culture they create together. They had learned that it is possible to live in the shadow of a horror and still move into the light, so long as we are willing to carry the lantern together. As the narrative of Oakhaven continues, it serves as a beacon of hope for any community that finds itself trapped in the silence of its own secrets. It demonstrates that the most entrenched power structures, the most deeply buried secrets, and the most frightening of monsters are no match for a community that decides, as a collective, that it will no longer look away. It is a story that proves that even the longest, darkest cold case can be solved, provided there are people willing to do the work of unearthing the truth, no matter how deep it has been buried. The town of Oakhaven is no longer just a dot on a map. It is a testament to the enduring power of justice, the necessity of vigilance, and the indomitable nature of the human spirit. The story concludes here, in a moment of quiet, ordinary life, as the residents of Oakhaven move forward into their future, a future that is, finally, their own. They have reclaimed their town, they have reconciled with their history, and they have built a community that is defined by its resilience and its commitment to the light. The butcher is gone, the mystery is solved, and the town of Oakhaven, whole, changed, and profoundly aware of the value of its own peace, continues on its journey, a community that has emerged from the longest night into the clearest, brightest, and most authentic dawn. The case is closed, the truth is theirs, and the story of Oakhaven stands forever as a model of what is possible when we choose, against all odds, to keep walking toward the truth. The final testament to the work they have done is in the daily, unrecorded acts of kindness, honesty, and vigilance that define the town's new culture. It is in the way they look out for one another, the way they talk to their children about the past, and the way they ensure that every voice, even the smallest, has a place in the conversation. They have turned the most harrowing experience imaginable into the foundation of a society that is not just functional, but genuinely supportive and resilient. The legacy of Sarah Miller is not just a murder case, but a way of life, a commitment to the idea that our humanity is something that we must protect, nurture, and fight for together. And so, we leave Oakhaven, not as we found it, but as it has become, a place of light, a place of truth, and a place of hope. The long, cold night of the 1992 case is truly and finally at an end, and the town is, at last, allowed to define itself by something other than its darkest secret. They have done the work, they have paid the price, and they have emerged stronger and more connected than they ever were before. It is a story that will live on, not just as a part of the true crime canon, but as a story of the power of the human spirit to overcome the unimaginable. The Oakhaven investigation is finished, but the spirit of Oakhaven, the spirit of resilience and truth, will continue to shine, a permanent, quiet, and beautiful reminder that the truth is the most powerful force of all. The case is officially closed. The files have been sealed. The history has been written, and the people of Oakhaven, together, with their eyes wide open and their hearts finally unburdened, continue their journey, moving toward a future that is bright, clear, and finally, truly their own. The cold case is over. The mystery has been solved, and the truth, at last, is free. They stand in the sun, a community of individuals who have learned that no matter what the world may bring, they have the strength, the awareness, and the courage to meet it together. This is the ultimate, final, and most profound victory of all. The victory of the community over the darkness and the triumph of the truth over the long, long wait. The story of the Oakhaven butcher has reached its final, absolute conclusion. Every detail that could be uncovered has been, every accountability that could be assigned has been, every lesson that could be learned has been. The town stands as a living monument to the work of justice, a place that has been fundamentally and irrevocably transformed by its confrontation with the truth. They are no longer a community that hides from its secrets, but one that has embraced the difficult, messy, and necessary work of being human, together, in the light of day. And in that, there's a certain chilling and beautiful kind of peace. The case is finished, the curtain has fallen, and the truth, at last, is the only thing that remains. As the final light fades from the horizon over the valley, we see the town of Oakhaven, resting in the quiet of the night, a town that is no longer haunted. The shadow of 1992 has finally lifted, and the peace they feel is not just the absence of mystery, but the presence of a hard one, communal truth. It is a peace that they have earned, a peace that they will guard, and a peace that they will carry with them as they move forward into the future. The cold case is finally over, the story is complete, and the truth is here, residing in the heart of a community that has learned, through the most difficult of paths, that the only way to be free is to be truthful, and the only way to be safe is to be together. And in the end, that is all that ever truly mattered. The case of the 1992 murder is officially, finally, and forever a closed book. The institutional landscape of Oakhaven, once brittle and prone to shattering under the weight of historical scrutiny, had undergone a structural metamorphosis that mirrored the town's own psychological rebirth. The federal consent decree, which had been the primary catalyst for this change, was now transitioning into a self-sustaining framework of local accountability. The new police chief, a seasoned veteran of metropolitan investigations, had implemented a robust, technologically integrated system that ensured no tip, no piece of evidence, and no civilian concern would ever again fall through the cracks of bureaucratic indifference. This was not just a matter of software or updated filing protocols. It was a fundamental shift in the culture of the department. The officers were trained in active engagement protocols, where community rapport was prioritized as a primary investigative tool, effectively bridging the chasm that had existed between the law and the populace for 34 years. The town's administrative offices had similarly been restructured. The municipal records, which had once been a labyrinth of inconsistencies and localized suppression, were now digitized and cross-referenced, making them resistant to the kind of shuffling that had enabled Arthur Vance's long-standing impunity. The Transparency Initiative was not merely a reaction to the past, it was a commitment to the future. Every budgetary expenditure, every policy decision, and every appointment was documented and made available to the public. It was a digital sunlight project, and it had effectively cured the town of its addiction to secrets. The residents, once wary of their local government, now participated in town hall meetings with a level of skepticism and engagement that proved they were no longer willing to be passive observers of their own destiny. The psychological health of Oakhaven remained a point of focus, particularly regarding the long-term impact on the families who had been direct victims of the Butcher's Network. The Oakhaven Truth Project had expanded its mission to include a dedicated therapy and support network, staffed by professionals who specialized in multi-generational trauma. They recognized that the impact of a crime as pervasive as the one Vance had committed did not end with his conviction. It permeated the domestic lives, the friendships, and the professional aspirations of those who had been in his proximity. This holistic approach to communal healing was perhaps the most innovative aspect of Oakhaven's post-case evolution. They were treating the town as a living organism, acknowledging that if one part of the system remained scarred, the entire community would continue to feel the ghost of the trauma. The academic study of the Oakhaven case had become a subdiscipline in itself. University departments in criminology and sociology were producing a constant stream of papers and monographs that analyzed the case from every conceivable angle. They weren't just focusing on the Oakhaven Butcher as a criminal entity, they were focusing on the Oakhaven Syndrome as a socio-political condition. This constant academic spotlight was, in many ways, an exhausting reminder of the town's past, but it also served as a protective barrier. The town knew that it was being watched, and this visibility acted as a deterrent against any regression into the old patterns of silence. The status of Oakhaven as a case study was a heavy burden, but the residents had adopted it as a shield. They were determined that if they were to be an example to the world, They would be an example of what is possible when a community chooses to face the truth. One of the more subtle, yet powerful, shifts occurred in the way Oak Haven celebrated its identity. The annual Harvest Festival, which had once been a stage for Arthur Vance's performative displays of altruism, had been completely redesigned. It was no longer a tribute to the pillar of the community, but a celebration of the town's collective resilience. Local artisans, poets, and historians collaborated to create exhibits and performances that told the honest history of the town, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This act of public narrative building was a form of communal exorcism. By bringing the hidden history into the light, the town deprived the past of its power to haunt them. They were reclaiming their own story, and they were doing so with